One night of celebration. One wrong turn on a dark mountain road. One split-second decision that changed everything. Welcome, listeners. This is a third-person retelling of I Know What You Did Last Summer by Lois Duncan, told from my own narrative perspective. A story inspired by a disturbing truth. A real hit-and-run accident near the author's own neighborhood, where the driver was never caught, and Duncan began asking herself, what if someone knew? First published in 1973. It has since sold over 4 million copies worldwide. Its author, Lois Duncan, was a Pulitzer Prize-nominated and best-selling novelist, known for YA thrillers like Down a Dark Hall and Killing Mr. Griffin. The story reached the big screen in 1997, a horror film that became a cult classic. And at the end, I'll share facts, behind-the-scenes details from the film, and trivia most listeners miss. Also, the visuals are created by today's technology. They may not be perfectly scene accurate, but they'll help you visualize the world. So bear with my request. And the story begins. The envelope sat beside her plate at breakfast, small, plain, its front hand lettered with her name and address in stark black print. Later, Julie would remember noticing it, but at that moment, her attention locked onto the long white, official-looking letter instead. She snatched it up, then hesitated, glancing at her mother who had just walked in from the kitchen. Julie announced that it had arrived. Her mother urged her to open it already, given how long she'd been waiting. Julie admitted she felt afraid, then slipped a finger under the flap and told herself to go ahead. She ran her finger the length of the envelope, pulled out the folded sheet, and smoothed it flat. Reading aloud, she got as far as the phrase, "Pleased to inform you," before her mother gasped with delight. Julie repeated the word accepted in disbelief, then told her mother she was going to Smith. Her mother came around the table and hugged her warmly, expressing pride and saying her father would have been proud too, though there was no sense looking backward. Her eyes glistened. She added that maybe he did know, and if not, she was proud enough for both of them. Julie admitted she couldn't believe it. She'd felt sure she'd missed too many questions on the tests. Her mother said the change had come during senior year, how Julie had buckled down and studied like a completely different person, and admitted it had worried her a little. Julie exclaimed in surprise, reminding her mother that last year she'd been on her constantly about going out too much, never studying, and spending half her life at cheerleading practice. Her mother acknowledged that, but said she'd never expected such an about-face, and she could almost pinpoint the day, right around when Julie broke up with Ray. Julie tried to keep her voice light despite a sudden cold shock in her stomach. She corrected her mother. She and Ray hadn't exactly broken up. They'd just decided they were seeing too much of each other and would slow down. Then he left for the coast, and that took care of that. Her mother pressed that Julie had given up dating so completely. Julie answered impatiently that she still went out sometimes. Bud was coming over tonight, and that was a date. Her mother conceded there was Bud, but only recently, and it wasn't the same. He was older, more serious. She was happy and proud about the college acceptance, but she wished Julie had balanced things better. She had the feeling Julie had missed a lot of senior year fun. Julie said you couldn't have it all. Her own voice sounded high and sharp to her ears. The cold feeling spread upward from her stomach toward her heart. She shoved back her chair and stood up, announcing she was going to her room to find her history notes. Her mother exclaimed that she hadn't eaten, gesturing at the untouched plate of eggs and toast. Julie apologized, saying she guessed she was too excited. She felt her mother's worried gaze follow her out. Even after she climbed the stairs and walked down the hall to her room, the worry stayed with her. Inside her room, she shut the door with a sharp click. Mom knows too much, she thought. Her mother had a funny way of knowing more than you ever told her. I've never seen such a change in anybody, her mother had said. I can almost pinpoint the day. But Julie told her silently that she couldn't, not really, and she shouldn't try. The room closed protectively around her. A perfect room for a pretty, loved, happy teenage girl who had never had a problem. Her mother had decorated it a little over a year ago for her 16th birthday, letting her choose any color. Julie had chosen pink. There was a pale pink t-shirt buried in the farthest corner of her closet, untouched since that night last summer, when Ray had teased her that she looked like a rosebud with freckles. She'd never worn it again, and would have given it away if not afraid her mother might remember and ask what happened to it. She sat on the end of her bed, drawing deep, slow breaths until the cold inside faded and her heart grew still. She told herself firmly that it had been almost a year since the thing happened. over and done with, and she'd sworn she'd never think about it again. If she got this uptight over an innocent comment from her mother, she'd wind up an absolute basket case again. Across the room, her reflection in the oval mirror looked back, pale, unsmiling. She noted with mild surprise how much she had changed. The girl in the mirror wasn't last year's bubbly, bouncy cheerleader with the smallest size and biggest yell. This girl had shadows behind her eyes and a tightness around the mouth. She reminded herself that she was going to Smith, getting out in only a couple of months, going east away from this town, the road, and the picnic area above it. She wouldn't run into Ray's mother, wouldn't see Barry on campus or Helen on television. She'd be out, free. New place, new people, new things to do and think about, a whole new set of things to remember. Her breathing slowed and steadied. She picked up the Smith letter from the bed and looked again at her name typed on the envelope. She decided to take it to school, not to other students, since she wasn't close to anyone this year, but to Mr. Price and Mrs. Busby. And tonight when Bud came over, she'd show it to him. He'd be impressed, maybe even sorry she was leaving. He'd been calling so often lately that he might be getting more serious than he should. It would be good for him to realize the relationship wasn't going anywhere, just for now, and in the fall she'd be somewhere else. A rap came at the door. Her mother asked if she was keeping track of time. Julie admitted she wasn't. She'd been sitting there gloating over the acceptance, and she'd about given up hoping because it had been so long since she applied. Her mother said sympathetically that she hadn't meant to take the wind out of her sails by criticizing. She knew how hard Julie had been working and was afraid she was overdoing it. She was glad Julie could now relax and enjoy the summer. Julie said she was glad too. She hugged her mother impulsively, and her mother hugged back, surprised and glad. Julie thought she ought to hug her more often. She didn't deserve a mother like this. She loved her so much, and she was all her mother had since Daddy died. Now she'd be going away and her mother would be alone, yet still happy for her. She asked if her mother would be okay, getting along with her so far away. Her mother replied with a catch in her voice that passed for laughter. She'd made out all right before Julie was born, and she'd keep busy, maybe go back to work full-time. Julie asked if she'd like that. Her mother thought so. It would be nice to have her own class again, and with Julie out of the nest, no one would need her at home, so it was time to be needed somewhere else. Julie apologized for losing track of time and said she'd better get going. Her mother glanced at her watch and agreed she was late, offering to drive. Julie said that was all right. She hadn't been late all year, so one late slip wouldn't kill her, and Mr. Price was pretty nice about things like that. She gathered her books and notes. Downstairs she rummaged in the coin bowl for Coke money. She told her mother she'd see her after school, that Bud wasn't picking her up until around 8, so they didn't have to eat early, and asked if her mother was going out anywhere. Her mother said she had no plans, then paused and reminded Julie she hadn't gotten her letter. Julie said she had. It was in her notebook. Her mother clarified, the other one. She leaned across the table and picked up the second envelope, half concealed by the egg plate, noting it couldn't be as exciting as the first. Julie took it, remarking that it looked like a party invitation, though she didn't know who'd invite her to a party. She noticed the big block printing and no return address. Tearing it open, she pulled out a folded sheet of lined paper. Her mother called back from the kitchen, asking who it was from. Julie answered that it was nobody her mother knew. She stared at the letter, at the single black sentence peering up from the smudged paper. A wave of nausea hit her. Her legs went weak, and she grabbed the table edge to steady herself. She told herself hopefully it was a dream. She wasn't really awake in the dining room. She was lying in bed upstairs, asleep, having a nightmare like the ones she used to have back in the beginning. If she closed her eyes and opened them, she would wake up. The paper would be gone. It would never have been. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the paper was still in her hand, its single printed sentence staring back. I know what you did last summer. Almost dusk when Barry Cox pulled out of the parking area behind the frat house. He drove through campus, then north on Madison to the Four Seasons apartments. A route so familiar he sometimes joked to his frat brothers that the car knew it by heart. They joked back, asking if the car might get confused and take him to other places instead. He answered smugly that it kept them straight. It had a GPS. Helen wasn't the only girl he went out with, though he was pretty sure he was the only guy she was seeing. That seemed crazy, given where she lived, an apartment complex full of singles, plus her swimsuit model looks and her showy job. Plenty of guys would be howling under her window. That was one reason he kept seeing her regularly. He hadn't planned to once high school ended. A college man had a wide territory, and there were hot girls on the university campus easy to hook up with, no strings attached. Then Helen landed the future star job, and that changed things. A guy would have to be nuts to throw over the Channel 5 future star. Pulling into the Four Seasons parking lot, he grinned to himself. Helen was doing all right for an 18-year-old who hadn't even finished high school. His mother had gone through the ceiling when she learned Helen dropped out at the end of junior year, saying it proved that a person is the result of her background, that Helen wasn't his kind, and she didn't understand how he ever started dating her. Which, of course, was part of the reason. It bugged his mother. Then there were Helen's looks. Beauty queen material, already paying off. Not many girls her age had their own apartments without even splitting the cost with a roommate. Helen's older sister Elsa still lived at home, stashing cashier earnings, hoping to get her own little hole in the wall in a year or so. Helen had her own car, trendy clothes, anything she wanted, not a worry in the world. So what had she been so upset about on the phone? That call surprised him. Helen wasn't the type to call boyfriends often. She seldom even texted without a definite reason. This time she hadn't given one. She'd said she had to see him, it was important, and asked if he could come over after work. He reminded her they'd just been out last night, and this week was off limits. He had finals to study for. She insisted it was important, with an edge in her voice that didn't happen often. Usually if he told her something, she accepted it without question. She said she wouldn't call like this if it wasn't important. He asked if she could tell him what it was about. She said no, just a flat no. He was intrigued despite himself. He did have exams and a coffee date later with some tri-delt girl, but nothing that couldn't be pushed back. He agreed to make it early, right after dinner. She said that was fine, the earlier the better. She didn't ask him to eat with her, and he was fine with that. Those domestic evenings with Helen serving pot roast by candlelight were rough to handle. He knew what she was aiming for, and it wasn't what he was aiming for, and the whole game was making him jittery. She said she was calling from the studio and had a webcast in a couple of minutes. She'd see him around 7. He said okay. The conversation left him curious. So curious he hadn't bothered going to the dining hall. He'd stopped at Wendy's for burgers and a Frosty. Now, barely past 6:30, he climbed out of his car and started up the walk past the pool toward the steps to the second-level apartments. The pool area was crowded. The spring evening was still cool, but the pool was heated. Polar bear types splashed around, and plenty of pretty girls sat high and dry in deck chairs, showing off bikini figures for the first opportunity of the season. He stopped to enjoy the view, a little surprised Helen wasn't among them. Her figure was better than the best, and she didn't mind displaying it. A shapely little brunette in a red and white halter and short shorts called out, asking if he was looking for an apartment. There was a vacancy on the second floor. He replied that not this year anyway, giving her a measuring glance. He would have given anything to live in a place like this. But it wasn't his mother's idea of something his father should finance. He was damned lucky just to have gotten into a frat house. He went around the pool and up the stairs, pausing to glance back at the brunette, who had turned sideways and was still watching him. Then he went down the upper deck and rapped on Helen's door. He had to wait a few minutes for an answer, something that seldom happened at Helen's. Then the door opened. She looked good as always. Honey-colored hair pulled back with a gold band, violet eyes carefully shadowed and outlined, wearing pale blue pants and a silk blouse with a chunky crystal necklace at the throat, evidently not changed since leaving the studio. She said he was early and she'd hoped he might be. He said he was glad he didn't disappoint her. Something was wrong, he decided. Something was decidedly strange. This wasn't the usual greeting. He asked what was up. She said to come in. They couldn't talk here. He stepped through the doorway and instinctively knew someone else was in the apartment. He glanced at Helen questioningly. She said it was Julie James. He exclaimed that she had to be kidding, then followed Helen into the living room where Julie sat on the sofa. He greeted her, saying long time no see and asking how everything was going. Julie answered stiffly, returning the hello. She wasn't as cute as he remembered, never the beauty Helen was, but she'd always had enough sparkle to make up for it. Now that glow seemed faded. Her eyes looked huge in a face too small to hold them. He repeated the greeting and said it was good to see her, that he'd thought she'd kind of dropped them off her friend list. Julie said she came there for a reason, then looked past him to Helen and asked if she hadn't told him. Helen said no, that Julie ought to be the one. It was her letter. Barry asked impatiently what they were talking about, what the big secret was. Julie said shortly that it wasn't a secret, and gestured toward a sheet of notebook paper on the coffee table. He gazed at it unseeingly for a moment. Then the words took shape, and his breath caught in his throat. He asked where it came from. Julie told him it came in the mail that morning, just stuck in with other letters, no return address. He began reading the statement aloud. I know what you did, then called it crazy, asking who would send something like that. Julie said again she didn't know, it was just there. He asked if she'd mentioned anything to anyone, if someone would know. She said she hadn't said a thing. He glanced at Helen. Her delicate, fine-boned face looked as bewildered as Julie's. She said nobody, she hadn't said a word to anyone either. Barry said neither had he. They'd made the pact, so there was no way this had any meaning. It was some joke, somebody taking a jab at Julie. They were silent a moment. Shouts and laughter drifted up from the swimming pool through the open window. For a fleeting second, the brunette in the red and white shorts slid through his mind. He wished he were out there with a beer in one hand, just kidding around. If there was one thing he didn't need, it was to deal with a scene like this. He said it must have been Ray. There was nobody else it could be. Ray wrote it as some kind of joke. Julie said he wouldn't, and Barry should know that. Barry said he didn't know anything of the kind. Julie had dumped Ray pretty abruptly. One day they were an item, the next she didn't even want to talk to him. This could be Ray's way of getting back at her by shaking her up a little. Julie insisted Ray wouldn't do that. Besides, she motioned toward the envelope beside the letter. It was postmarked from here, and the last card she'd had from Ray was sent from California. Helen spoke up suddenly. Ray was back in town. She'd seen him yesterday. Julie turned to her in astonishment, asking where. Helen said in that little deli across from the studio at lunchtime. He was coming out as she went in. She almost didn't recognize him. He was so tan now and had grown a beard. Then she looked back, and he was looking back too, and it was definitely Ray. He held up his hand and kind of waved at her. Barry said that must be who it was, calling it a sick trick and saying the guy must have gone over the edge. Julie said decidedly she didn't believe it. She knew Ray better than either of them, and he wouldn't do a thing like this. He'd felt worse than any of them when it happened. He wouldn't make a joke of it this way. Helen agreed she didn't think he would either. She reached over and turned the paper to see it better, then asked if there was any other way someone could have found out, maybe by tracing the car. Barry said not a chance. Ray and he had spent a whole day hammering the dent out of that fender, then painted the car and got rid of it the next weekend. Helen asked Julie if she was sure she hadn't said anything, knowing how close she was to her mother. Julie said she told them she didn't, and if she did tell her mother, did they think she'd mail something like this? Helen admitted no, but said there didn't seem to be any answer besides that. If none of them told, if it wasn't the car. Barry broke in, asking if it ever occurred to the two of them that this note might be about something else entirely. Julie repeated the phrase blankly. About something else? Barry pointed out that the note didn't actually say anything specific. Julie quoted the line about knowing what she did. Barry countered that last summer was 3 months long. She'd probably done plenty of things. Julie insisted Barry knew what it meant. He claimed he didn't, and neither did she. Maybe the writer didn't know either. Maybe it was a joke. Kids made crank calls, wrote notes, sent spam. Some kid plays a prank, writes a dozen of these, and sends them to strangers right out of the phone book. Was there a person in the world who, getting such a message, couldn't look back and think of something from last summer they weren't proud of? Julie digested that in silence, then said they had an unlisted number. Barry said the person found her some other way. A nerd from school with a crush. Some guy she'd pissed off by refusing to date, the bag boy at the grocery store. Plenty of creeps got their kicks from shaking up girls. Relief washed through Helen's voice as she agreed. She'd known people like that herself. The phone calls she got working on television were unbelievable. One guy would call and just breathe, not saying a word. She'd been ready to go out of her mind, answering the phone thinking it might be Barry and hearing only heavy breathing in her ear. Julie admitted slowly that it was possible. She hadn't thought of something like that. Helen asked, if last summer's event hadn't happened, if Julie had gotten this note without something springing straight to mind, she'd have thought about it like that, wouldn't she? Julie guessed she would have. She drew a long breath and asked if Barry really thought that was it, just somebody's idea of a joke. Barry told her firmly that was the answer. What else could it be? If somebody actually knew something, they wouldn't write silly notes. They'd go to the police. Helen added that it wouldn't be now. It would have been back in July when it happened. Why wait 10 months to react? Julie said when put that way, it didn't sound likely. Barry said it wasn't likely. She'd tied herself in knots over nothing. And Helen was just as bad, calling him like that. He'd thought something awful had happened. Helen apologized contritely. Julie had called her that afternoon, and she'd reacted the same way. They both panicked. Barry told them to unpanic and got to his feet. Helen's lovely apartment, usually so spacious and luxurious, suddenly felt unbearably suffocating. He announced he had to get going. Helen suggested he stay a while. She had an hour and a half before leaving for the studio. He reminded her that was an hour and a half he didn't have. This was a closed week and he had to study. He turned to Julie, offering a ride back to her house on his way to campus. She declined. She had her mother's car. Helen asked Julie to stay. They hadn't talked for ages and had a lot to catch up on. Julie said another time. She had a date picking her up at 8. Barry told her to take it easy and said it was good seeing her. He turned back to Helen, saying he'd be seeing her. Helen suggested planning something for Monday. Memorial Day usually meant a party around the complex. Barry said it depended on how much studying he got done over the weekend. He'd call her, he promised. She started to get up to walk him to the door, but he waved her back down. After this, the last thing he felt like was an affectionate farewell scene with Julie as an audience. He let himself out, leaving the two girls together, and went down the steps and along the side of the pool. Underwater lights were on now. The crowd of exhibitionists had thinned. The perpetual Friday evening party around the pool had broken into several smaller parties. Most moved upstairs into private apartments. Gaslights flickered along the walkway. Greenery rustled in the faint evening breeze. He got into his car and turned the key. Somewhere in the lot, another engine came to life. Sitting quiet, he let the motor idle. He saw no movement among the rows of parked cars. He told himself impatiently it was coincidence. He was as uptight as those crazy girls. He flicked on the headlights, threw the car into gear, and pulled out onto Madison Avenue. He drove slowly back to campus, glancing occasionally into the rearview mirror. Lights followed, but it was early weekend evening, streets always busy with traffic. When he turned onto Campus Drive, the car behind turned too. But when he slowed and pulled to the curb, it went past without hesitation and disappeared around a curve. He repeated to himself that he was crazy. Why should he suddenly think people were following him just because Julie James pushed the panic button? Like he'd told her, there were all kinds of creeps. But the uneasy feeling persisted, a pair of eyes boring into his back between the shoulder blades as he left the car in the lot and walked back across the lawn to the frat house entrance. When Julie pulled into the driveway, a car was already parked in front of the house. Her first thought was that Bud had come early, but a second glance told her this wasn't Bud's cream-colored Dodge. The front door stood open. Through the screen, voices floated to her as she crossed the lawn and mounted the porch steps. One voice was her mother's, lifted with unaccustomed gaiety. The second voice stopped her. For a long moment she stood frozen, caught and held. Then her mother, seated on the far side of the living room facing the doorway, glanced up and saw her, announcing with delight that Ray was there. Julie opened the screen and went inside, drawing the solid door closed behind her. She greeted him a bit stiffly, saying she'd seen the car but hadn't recognized it. Ray Bronson got to his feet, saying it was his dad's car. He stood awkwardly, then held out his hand, asking how she was. She said okay, fine, went forward, put her hand in his, formally, then released it. His hand was harder than she remembered. She said she hadn't known he was back. His last card was from the coast, saying he was working on some kind of fishing boat. Ray said he had been, but the boat owner's kid worked summers and there wasn't room for both. Julie said that was too bad because she could think of nothing else. Ray said not really, jobs like that were on again, off again, and he'd been about ready to come home anyway. He waited for her to sit, so she did. Not beside him on the sofa, but in the armchair facing him. He sat again. He said her mother had been telling him about her getting the go-ahead from Smith. That was great. She must really have been hitting the books. Her mother said with pride that Julie had worked hard. Ray wouldn't have known her this year, and whether it was because he hadn't been around to keep her out half the night, or she'd just decided to buckle down, the results were remarkable. Ray said that was great again. Mrs. James rose, saying she had a cake waiting to be iced in the kitchen, and knew the kids had a lot of catching up to do. She'd bring them a piece when it was done. Ray said he couldn't stay long. Julie said she had a date in just a few minutes. She didn't meet his eyes when she said it, though she knew he'd probably expect her to have a date on Friday night. He'd undoubtedly done his own socializing in California. She wondered what he'd think of Bud, so far from the type she'd dated in school, so far from Ray's type. But Ray himself had changed tremendously since she'd last seen him. He looked older, very tan, his light hair growing thick and long over his ears, his brows bleached pale over his cat-green eyes. As Helen had reported, he'd grown a beard, short and stubby, looking like it belonged on someone else's face. They sat in awkward silence after her mother left. Then they both spoke at once, stopped, and Julie carefully said it was nice he came by. Ray said he'd thought he'd say hello. He'd thought about her a lot. He just wanted to see how she was. She repeated she was fine. But the green eyes that knew her so well, through parties, picnics, cheerleading tryouts, being caught cheating on a math test and getting chickenpox right before homecoming, those eyes kept looking in disbelief. Ray said she didn't look fine, she looked like hell. Had it been dragging on her like this ever since? She said no, she didn't think about it. He said he didn't believe her. She told him she didn't let herself. She lowered her voice and said she'd made up her mind right after the funeral. She knew if she kept thinking, what good would that do? People went crazy, dwelling on things they couldn't change. She paused, then said she'd send him flowers. Ray looked surprised. She'd gone to people's flower shop and bought yellow roses, delivered without her name. She knew it was silly. It couldn't help. She just felt she had to do something and couldn't think of anything else. Ray said he knew. He'd felt the same way. He didn't think of sending flowers. He kept waking up at night, seeing that curve in the road again, that bicycle coming up suddenly out of the dark, feeling the thud and then the bump as the wheels went over it. He'd lie there and shake. Julie said that was why he went away. A statement, not a question. Ray asked if that wasn't why she was going to Smith, to get away from here. She'd never cared that much about college. She used to talk about maybe taking computer courses right in town while he went to the university. Going east had been the last thing on her mind. Julie said Barry was at the U now, on the football team. Ray said he'd seen Helen yesterday at lunch. She looked pretty. Julie said Helen was a future star. Channel 5 had a beauty contest based on photographs, and Helen won. She had a full-time job representing the station, giving spot announcements and small news reports, even DJing her own afternoon webcast. Ray said great, then asked if they were still together. Julie guessed so, she'd seen them today. She shook her head, saying she didn't know how Helen could do it. Keep going with Barry, I mean. Helen was there, she saw him that night, she heard the things he said. How could she still think he was so wonderful? How could she even stand to have him touch her? Ray reminded her it was an accident. God knew Barry didn't plan it. It could have been him driving the car. It would have been if he hadn't won the toss for the back seat. Julie said Ray would have stopped. A long silence hung between them. Ray asked at last if he would have. Julie said sharply, of course, then asked wouldn't he? Ray shrugged. Who knows? He told himself he would have. She thought he would have. But how could they know how anybody would react in a situation like that? They'd all had a few beers and smoked a little pot. It happened so fast. Julie said he called for the ambulance. He wanted to go back. Ray admitted he didn't insist on it. She wanted to go back too, but they didn't. They let Barry talk them into the pact. He could have held out, but he didn't. He must have wanted to be talked into it. He was no better than Barry, Jules, so she shouldn't try to make Barry the Black Knight and him the prince on the white horse. It just wasn't that way. Julie said he was as bad as Helen. Both of them formed the Great Society for Admiring Barry Cox. They'd stick up for him no matter what he did. She should have heard Helen tonight, begging him to call this weekend, and here they were, supposedly a couple. It was just so degrading. Ray said he didn't see anything degrading about sticking by your guy if you cared about him. His brows drew together in that quizzical look she knew so well. He asked what she was doing at Helen's anyway. He thought she'd burned all her bridges, cutting ties with all of them. Julie told him she had, that is, she meant to. But today she'd gotten a letter in the mail that upset her, so she called Helen, then Helen called Barry, and suddenly there they all were hashing it over. She wished now she'd just chucked it and not made such a big deal. Ray looked interested and asked what sort of letter. Julie said it was just a prank thing. Helen said she got them sometimes, plus phone calls and emails, but Julie had never gotten one before, so she overreacted. She opened her purse, fished out the envelope, and offered it if he wanted to see. Ray got up, came over, sat on the arm of her chair, and took the letter from her hand. He opened and read it. Julie said Barry thought some kid wrote it, that it didn't really mean anything, it just happened to hit on something that struck a nerve. She paused, watching Ray's face as he studied the black line of printing, and asked if that was what he thought. Ray said it was possible, but it was one hell of a coincidence. Why pick on her? Did she know anybody who could have sent it? She said Barry thought maybe some boy from school. Ray noted she'd said she was dating, then raised his eyes from the paper and asked if the guy she was going out with tonight was the practical joker type. Julie said Bud was as far from it as you could get. A nice guy, older, serious about everything. He'd been in the army and fought in Iraq. The last thing he'd ever do was write silly notes. Ray asked abruptly if she was in love with him. The question was so sudden and far from their previous discussion that she was unprepared. She said no. Ray asked if he was in love with her. She said she didn't think so, maybe a little. She asked him to please understand. This was just a nice guy she met one day in the library. He asked her out. Mom had been bugging her about never going anywhere anymore, so she went. Then it was easy just to keep on. Besides, what difference did it make to him? They weren't a thing anymore. Ray asked if they weren't. He reached out a hand and placed it gently under her chin, tilting her face up. The face looking down at her was familiar, darker and stronger than she remembered, framed with shaggy hair and a beard. But the eyes were the same. No stranger could ever look at her through Ray's green eyes. He said it was still there. She knew it was. She could feel it the same way he could, the moment she walked into the room. They'd had too good a thing for too long. They couldn't just let it go. Julie said that was how it had to be. She meant it. It was the only way they'd ever forget. She was going to leave here, leave all the people and places connected with that horrible night, and never look back. It was over and done with. There was no repairing it. So she was going to erase it. Ray's voice was sad as he asked if she thought that was possible. Something like that didn't get erased. He thought maybe it could too, there in the beginning. That's why he packed up and took off. New places, new people. He thought that would do it. But it didn't. She couldn't run away. Her at Smith, him out in California, it was still there with them. He realized that finally. It's why he came home. Julie asked chokingly that if she couldn't run away, what could she do? Ray said face up to it. She asked if he meant break the pact. He said no, they couldn't do that. But they could talk to the others. They could dissolve the pact if they were all in agreement. Julie said never. Barry would never agree, and if he wouldn't, Helen wouldn't. The doorbell rang. Ray's hand dropped to his side and he got up from the arm of her chair, saying that must be her friend. Julie guessed so. He was picking her up at 8. Her eyes went nervously from Ray's face to the door. Ray told her not to worry, he'd behave himself. He'd probably even like Bud. Bud had good taste in girls anyway. They went to the door together, and Julie introduced them. Bud asked if Raymond Bronson was any relation to Booter Bronson, who ran the sporting goods store. Ray said he was his son, then said he heard Bud just got back from Iraq and didn't envy him that gig. They shook hands civilly and stood talking a few moments in a pleasant fashion, as though they might have been friends if given the chance. Then Ray left. Julie excused herself and went upstairs to comb her hair. When she came down, Bud was still standing by the door where she'd left him. He looked up and smiled as she came down the stairs. For an instant she felt like crying because his smile was such a nice one, and because his eyes weren't green. One of the pleasant things about being the Channel 5 future star, Helen Rivers often reminded herself, was the hours. 11 o'clock in the morning usually found her stretched in a deck chair soaking up sunshine beside the pool. Because this particular day was Saturday, it wasn't exactly her private pool. An assortment of school teachers used it too. But on a usual weekday, she could sleep half the morning and come down to find the whole lovely area to herself. Her sister Elsa sometimes commented on weekends when Helen dutifully went home for Sunday dinner that she couldn't imagine why they paid her all that money. She didn't do anything anyone else couldn't do. Just smile and play songs and make silly comments. Elsa worked an 8-hour day at Ward's department store and believed the only work that counted was the kind that made your back ache and sent you home exhausted. Helen tried to tell her there was more to it than that. She was at their beck and call whenever they needed someone to represent the station for publicity reasons, and it could really kill her evenings having to give reports on the 10 o'clock news. Even to her own ears the statement sounded ludicrous. In all honesty, she knew being selected as the future star was the culmination of almost every dream she'd ever had. Helen's looks were the best thing she had going for her, and she was realistic enough to have recognized that fact early. At 12, she'd sat down one day and examined herself in the mirror. What she saw was pleasing, but not pleasing enough. Cold-bloodedly she analyzed her attributes. Good bones, even teeth, fine features. She had a nice chest for her age, but too much weight in the hips. Her coloring was too pale, her hair rather ordinary but thick and healthy. Her hands weren't particularly small, but they were long-fingered and artistic-looking despite bitten fingernails. She broke the fingernail habit immediately through sheer willpower. The rest took more time, especially the weight loss. She liked to eat, and her family's food was usually inexpensive and starchy. A strenuous diet brought her figure under control, and experimentation with rinses and makeup brought out the honey highlights in her hair and fringed her deep violet eyes, her most unusual feature, with long, blue-black lashes. Elsa taunted her, asking what she thought she was, a fairy princess. Helen ignored her. It would have been nice if such were the case, she admitted to herself. As the second daughter in a large family, She had no illusions about magic and fairy godmothers. She had only to look at her own mother, haggard from years of housework, budget stretching, and childbearing, and her father sweating out his days at construction work, to know her chances for a luxurious future were slim. Still, she was pretty, and that could serve for something. It would have to, she told herself, because she certainly had no academic talents. Dropping out of school to accept the future star job had been more relief than sacrifice. She'd stuck through school that far for one reason only: she had fallen in love. She had loved Barry Cox from the first moment she saw him. Big and broad-shouldered, handsome and popular, he was as close to perfect as any guy she could ever imagine. As captain of the city's winning high school football team, he could have had his pick of any girl. His choosing her was the surprising thing, the actual miracle. It had happened so suddenly that she'd never been able to figure out the exact circumstances. She had been walking home from school when a bright red sports car pulled up beside her, and Barry had been in it. Barry had said hi there, and told her to climb in, he'd drive her home. When he dropped her off, he asked her for a date. It happened that simply, and her world had never been the same. Now stretched in the deck chair, letting the morning sun sink into her body, she thought she shouldn't have called him. Barry didn't like to be pressured. She'd learned that from his mother. Early in their relationship, before she knew his cell number, she'd called him at home to check what time he was picking her up. Mrs. Cox answered and gave her some advice in a cool, sharp voice. Barry didn't react well to being chased. If he wanted to talk, he would do the calling. Her little affair would last longer that way, believe her. Since then, Helen had called him only when absolutely necessary. Yesterday's call had seemed to fall into that category, but in retrospect she realized it hadn't. Barry had been irritated. He did have exams to study for. Dragging him away from his books to confront him with that silly note had been ridiculous. His explanation had been so reasonable that now it seemed incredible she and Julie couldn't have thought of it themselves. A voice beside her asked if he could sit down, startling her so she jumped. Her eyes flew open, and for a moment she was blinded. The young man apologized for scaring her. She said he didn't. She must have been half asleep and didn't hear him come up. She shaded her eyes with one hand to look at him. Brown eyes, brown hair, a strong square-cut face, medium build, wearing olive-green swimming trunks cut like shorts. She was used to faces around the complex, and this one was unfamiliar. She asked if he was new. He said he'd just moved in yesterday, apartment 211, and asked if it would bother her if he sat down. She said no, of course not, and watched idly as he settled into an identical chair beside her. There were plenty of other seats and other people he could have sat beside. She told him Saturdays were the heavy day for sunbathers. Most people were off work trying to build tans. She introduced herself. The young man said his name was Collingsworth Wilson. Excuse the mouthful, just out of the service. He'd been staying at his folks' place in the mountains, and finally decided to cut loose and get his own apartment. He thought he'd be going to summer school at the university. Helen said the guy she went with went to the U. Working that statement in early, she'd found it allowed harmless flirtation without having to reject overtures. She commented that Collingsworth was a different sort of name and asked if they called him Collie. He said he had a family nickname his kid brother stuck him with. But Collie was okay too. A lot of people called him that. He was like a well-trained puppy, he answered to anything. Helen smiled, saying a well-trained collie, and that she was glad to meet him. They were practically next-door neighbors. She was on the second level too, down the way in 215. Collie asked who the boyfriend was. He wanted to be sure to avoid him. She said his name was Barry Cox. He lived on campus but came over a lot. He'd be meeting him. Everybody met everybody here in the summer. She closed her eyes, rolled onto her stomach so the sun could reach her shoulders, and said the pool area made a wonderful meeting place. They all sat around talking and partying. Four Seasons was a great place to live. She knew he'd like it. Collie said he liked it already, but he'd like it even better if the prettiest girl here wasn't tied up to some jerk before he could even get his bid in. He asked if she'd been hooked up with this guy long. She said almost 2 years. They were steadies back in high school, and he was definitely not a jerk. She asked if she thought she was burning. Collie said he couldn't tell what was happening under all that suntan lotion. She said she'd better get inside. She'd been out there a couple of hours already. She couldn't afford to start peeling. If she looked a mess, she might lose her job. Collie asked what sort of work she did where she couldn't get a sunburn. Was she a model or something? Helen said she was the Channel 5 future star, unable to keep the pride from her voice. It was still such a new sensation to say that. Maybe he'd seen her on TV. Collie said if he had, he was sure he'd remember it. He didn't usually watch TV much, but he could see where he'd have to start. Helen told him there was a big screen down in the common area, picked up her suntan lotion, and got to her feet. She thought objectively that he'd be a nice addition to the men around here. Not as handsome as Barry by a long shot, but a lot of girls were going to like him. Wait till those two man-hungry schoolteachers in 214 got a look at him. They'd tear each other to shreds over who got her hooks in first. She told him to enjoy the sun but not to doze off like she did, or he might turn into a lobster. This southwest sun could really get to you when you weren't used to it. He said got it and wished her good luck on not peeling, raising a hand in casual farewell. As she skirted the pool and climbed the stairs to the second level, she thought again that he was nice. The doors to the second-floor apartments all opened onto a narrow balcony. She walked slowly along it, wondering how red she really was. Foolish to lie out like that right in the middle of the day. A tan could look great on camera, but had to be picked up carefully, no more than an hour at a time. If she did peel, she told herself, maybe she could work it into a weather report. Something about it being good and hot today, hoping viewers showed better sense than she did. That was the sort of thing she was beginning to learn to do. Toss out ad-libs. As she kept telling Elsa, there was more to television work than just looking pretty and smiling. You had to think under stress, seem natural, and come out with occasional quirky remarks, so you didn't come across as a mechanical doll. There was a paper taped to her apartment door. She didn't see it until she reached it, and then she could only stand and stare. It was a picture cut from a magazine ad. The text had been cut away. What remained was the image of a little boy on a bicycle. When the envelope arrived in the morning mail, Ray Bronson was not surprised. He opened it and drew out a newspaper clipping. He knew what it contained, for he had read it many times before. Now he did so again and felt all the old sensations. A 10-year-old boy killed last night in a hit-and-run accident on Mountain Road, 2 miles south of the Silver Springs picnic area. Dead was Daniel Gregg, riding his bicycle when struck by an unidentified vehicle. A phone call from an alleged occupant informed authorities. The boy was conscious upon arrival of the rescue crew, but died en route to the hospital. The boy's father told reporters his son had been spending the night at a friend's house in the Mountain Road area, and evidently decided to return home during the evening. The bicycle did not have a light or reflectors. Police were looking for the car that struck him. Paint deposits showed it to have been light blue. Daniel was survived by his parents, a half-brother, a half-sister, a maternal grandfather, 2 aunts, and uncle. Ray folded the article and put it back into the envelope. His own address stared up at him in the same black hand-printed letters that had formed the message to Julie. It's not a joke, he told himself. Not a joke at all. Not that he'd ever really believed it was. Since Julie had thought so, there seemed little sense in pursuing the matter. It was possible. It might have been a joke. And she had managed to convince herself. In his heart, even then, he'd been pretty sure it wasn't. So it's caught up with us, he thought finally. His own lack of surprise surprised him. It was as though he had known all along, somewhere deep within himself, that this was going to happen. It was why he had come home, and a year ago it was why he had gone away. The Raymond Bronson of a year ago had been a pretty spineless individual. He had always been small, which was part of it. Not so much that he was short, 5'9" was passable, but that he was lean, light-boned, and not particularly well-muscled. In some families this wouldn't have mattered. When you were the only son of a man who had once been a professional football player, it mattered a lot. Herb Bronson, Ray's father, had been known in his youth as the Booter. Friends still called him that, and he sometimes referred to himself that way half-jokingly, calling out when he came home that the Booter was hungry enough to eat a bull, with Mrs. Bronson laughing back that braised bull was just what she'd planned to serve. The Booter hadn't had a particularly long or glorious career. A knee injury in his second year as a defensive halfback forced him to retire from professional athletics. He was, however, a highly successful businessman. Bronson's sporting goods store had been the first of what eventually became a small chain in 2 southwestern states. Ray's build had been a disappointment to the Booter, and he had always known it. At the same time, he knew his father loved him. Teasing comments were tempered with affection. Herb Bronson would call out jovially to Twerp, asking when he was going to put some weight on. At Christmas time, half the stock from the Bronson stores appeared under the tree. Footballs, shoulder pads, bats and rackets, boxing gloves and camping gear. Ray hadn't done badly in minor sports. He was on the high school golf team and could play decent tennis. Football was beyond him. He made the B squad in junior high when classmates hadn't yet reached full growth. But upon entering high school, he found himself surrounded by towering individuals weighing 200 pounds or more. The boys were friendly. Most knew the Booter by reputation. If he couldn't compete physically, Ray was superior academically. They respected him for that, and as a natural-born teacher, he often tutored them. No major athlete himself, he had athletes as friends. The first time he brought Barry Cox home for dinner, his father and Barry sat over tall glasses of milk for 2 full hours after the meal, reviewing plays from Herb's career and more recent ones from Barry's experiences. His father remarked late that evening that Barry was a sharp kid who was going to make it big. He asked if Barry was a good friend, if Ray hung out with him a lot. Ray said yes. His father approved, saying he liked to see Ray with friends like that. Later that year, when Ray started dating Julie James, there was a similar reaction. His father noted he'd got a cheerleader for a girlfriend, joked that cuties of the school were the same in his day. It took a real man to hook a cheerleader. Julie was much more than that, but Ray didn't tell his father. He just crooked an eyebrow and made a little "here's to us" motion, and his father clapped him on the shoulder in a man-to-man way. Disappointing to have a son who couldn't follow in his footsteps, but Ray was there in spirit doing his best, and the booter knew it and respected him for it. That was the Raymond Bronson of a year ago. Sometimes when Ray thought back, it was like looking at another person. He thought incredulously that he hadn't been anybody real. Kind of a shadow, partly dad, partly Barry, not making it either way and not knowing how else he could. He didn't know what Julie saw in him. But she saw something. She'd said "I love you" once. Only once. They didn't get mushy often, usually just goofed around and had a good time. But one time she turned to him suddenly, saw something in his face that reflected back into hers. They weren't even making out. It was a Sunday afternoon sitting on the floor playing some crazy card game, and out of the blue Julie looked across at him and said it. That was in the past. She didn't love him now. That love had been snuffed out forever in one instant on one summer's night, as quickly and irrevocably as one little boy's life. Barry had been driving too fast. Barry always drove too fast, but he drove well, and nobody got upset about it. Helen sat close to him in the front seat. When Ray thought back, he could remember her hair hanging over the back of the seat, swinging back and forth as the car took curves. Aside from that, he didn't remember much, because he'd been making out with Julie most of that ride. It was Ray's car, but as usual he and Barry flipped for the back seat, and this time Ray won. Julie sprawled in his arms, wearing a pink t-shirt that clung to her curves and slid up, revealing her flat stomach. Suddenly, while they were kissing, Helen screamed. The scream brought them both upright instantly. There wasn't time to see much before it happened. The bicycle appeared in front of them, caught in the headlights' glare. They saw the child from the back, wearing a striped shirt, then came the thud and crunch, and then they were past. Julie whispered from beside him, "My God, we hit him!" Ray tried to answer but couldn't get his voice working. The car didn't stop. It was moving on, going faster, taking the next curve with such speed that they were all thrown sideways. Julie fell on top of him, clutching him, whispering over and over that they hit him. Ray managed to croak that they had to go back. Barry yelled over his shoulder, asking what good that would do. Beside him, Helen sobbed wildly. Julie leaned forward, pulling away from Ray, saying they had to go back and help that little boy. Barry said they weren't doctors and couldn't do anything. He slowed down, driving more evenly, saying once they got back into town they'd call an ambulance. That was the best help they could give. Ray said they couldn't wait until then. He was calling now. Barry told him to give it a couple of minutes till they were onto the freeway. Frozen in place, Ray waited as Barry instructed, a wait he now realized was unforgivable. 10 whole minutes passed before he punched in 911. He frantically reported an accident on Mountain Road south of Silver Springs, just above the junction with 301. They'd hit a kid on a bicycle. The emergency operator asked who was making the call. Ray began to give his name, but Barry shouted at him not to say anything more, and Ray obeyed on instinct, hitting the off button. Barry continued more quietly that Ray had told them enough, what happened and where. An ambulance would be there in a couple of minutes. No sense giving their names. Ray said they'd get their names when they went back. A pause, then he asked if they were going back. Barry asked for what. Ray said because they had to. Barry said they didn't have to do anything. In the front seat, Helen had stopped sobbing. Julie said nothing, seeming zonked out as a zombie. Not enough light to see either face. Ray told them, since neither seemed to be taking in Barry's statement, that Barry didn't want to go back. Helen said she didn't either, but she guessed they had to. She drew a strangled breath and began crying again very softly, saying she didn't want to go back and see what they did. Julie said tonelessly it wasn't what they wanted to do, it was what they had to do. It was the law. Barry pulled into the far left lane of the freeway, carefully keeping just under the speed limit. He said that sounded real noble, a great decision for them to make, But who would get hit with a manslaughter charge if the kid died? He was driving, not them. And he was the only one who no longer ranked as a juvenile. Ray said that was right. Barry was 18. Barry said damned right, no juvenile court for him, it was the real thing, he'd be tried as an adult. Helen protested it was an accident, they could all testify to that. The bike came out of nowhere, no lights, no reflectors. It wasn't their fault. Barry asked if she thought that would make any difference. The facts were they'd been out partying. Beer and pot. Cops would spot that the moment they got out of the car. And it was a hit and run. Ray called in a report, but technically it was a hit and run, about the worst charge you could get hit with. Julie said the boy might not be dead, probably only injured. Barry said still, it was a hit and run. Ray said he was responsible too, it was his car. Barry turned to look back at him, saying Ray would have been driving it too if he hadn't won the toss. He was the bright guy who skipped a grade, still only 17. If he wanted to turn himself in, go back and do it. Ray asked with horror if Barry meant let them think Ray was driving. Helen said he could, if he was that determined to confess. The worst that might happen was his license taken away for a few months. It was his car, and like Barry said, pure luck he wasn't the one driving. Julie spoke up sharply. That was ridiculous. He wasn't driving, and it would be stupid for him to say he was. It would be on his record forever. Helen's voice shook as she said so it was all right for Barry to get a jail sentence. But heaven forbid Ray got a splotch on his record. What kind of friends were they to offer Barry up like a human sacrifice? He had something to lose. They didn't. Ray said quietly she had a point. It would all be on Barry. He wasn't any more responsible than the rest of them, except that he happened to be driving. Julie said driving too fast. He always drove too fast. Barry asked bitterly if she'd ever objected before. If she was so concerned about his driving, why didn't she say so? She was awfully anxious to get into the back seat tonight. Oh, Ray, we won! She knew he was a little bit high. It didn't bother her then. Helen said, let's take a vote, decide that way. A moment's silence, then Barry asked the two in the back if they agreed to stick by a vote. Julie said it would be 2-2. Barry said then they'd flip. Julie said you don't flip about things like this. Barry asked how else they were going to decide. Helen said they had to vote. It was the only thing they could do. She voted they not go back. Just go home and let the police and doctors take care of things. What good would going back do? They couldn't help. Barry voted with Helen. Julie voted adamantly to go back. Now. Barry pressed her if she'd abide by the final vote. She said by a vote but not by a flip. If it was 2-2, she was holding out for going back. She turned confidently to Ray. Ray began to say he voted. He looked at Barry, saw in the dark car the tense way Barry sat, hands clenched on the steering wheel. In the distance came the wail of a siren. Ray said softly that Barry was his best friend Julie. She stared in disbelief, asking if he meant he was voting with them. Ray couldn't be. Ray said like Barry said, what good would going back do now? The damage was done. The boy would have all the help he needed before they could even get there. It would be so unfair, letting Barry take the blame for all of them. Julie whispered that she didn't believe it. She just didn't believe he was really saying this. A long silence followed. Then Barry declared that was it. They'd made a pact, and no one could break it. He told them to get back into town, split up, and go home. The next morning it was in the paper. Ray read it at breakfast. Sitting at the table, hearing his father read aloud from the sports page, smelling the pancakes his mother had just placed before him, he stared down at the story on page 2 next to the obituaries and knew he was going to be sick. The article reported that Daniel Gregg had been conscious upon arrival of the rescue crew, but died en route to the hospital. Ray mumbled an excuse that he wasn't too hungry, got quickly to his feet, and made it out of the room before his mother could stop him, despite her concerned exclamation. Later, he called Julie. Mrs. James answered and told him Julie wasn't feeling well that morning, suggesting he call back in the evening. He did, and Julie answered. Her voice sounded small and thin. She said she didn't want to talk. Not now, not about anything. Ray knew then it was over. He placed the receiver back on the hook, lowered his face into his hands, and for the first time since he was a little boy, he cried. Now, almost a full year later, he stood staring again at the story, the same cold feeling touching his heart. The clipping was yellowed from exposure. Someone had handled it often and read it many times. It was creased down the middle and had the smell of old dollar bills. Someone had kept it in a wallet, perhaps, drawing it out at odd times during the day to look at it, to dwell upon it. Someone had finally come to a decision, addressed an envelope, and mailed it to an 18-year-old boy named Raymond Bronson. Ray asked himself why. Did the person who sent this really know something, or was he just guessing? What did he know exactly? Who was he? And how did he know it? And most important of all, what was he going to do next? On Memorial Day, Barry Cox had dinner with his parents. The conversation at the table was about the coming summer. His mother wanted him to spend it at home. She proposed that in August they take a little trip to the East Coast, just the two of them. She knew how he loved to drive the Lexus, and it had been 4 years since they visited Aunt Ruth and Uncle Harry. If Dad could get away for a week, he could fly and meet them there. They might even take a few days in New York and see some shows. Barry told her he didn't know. He had sort of some other things in mind for the summer. His mother looked surprised and asked what. His father asked if it was summer school or a job. Barry explained that Lou Wheeler and some other guys were taking off for Europe, spending the summer bumming around, hiking, sleeping in hostels, the whole bit. They wanted to know if he'd go with them. His father commented dryly that sounded like an expensive 3 months. Barry said not really. College kids got reduced plane fare, hostels were almost free, and food didn't cost more than it did here. His mother rested her fork and said it didn't sound like a nice way to see Europe. She'd had Europe in mind as a graduation present. A very special trip with nice hotels, famous restaurants, concerts, everything. It was going to be a surprise. Barry said that was 3 years away. She said they'd pass quickly, and that he'd almost completed a whole year of college. She smiled fondly and said he needed a summer to relax and get to know his own family again. He'd been so wrapped up in his studies lately they'd hardly seen him. It was the same old tune he'd heard a million times before. His teeth were on edge and his toes bored holes in the bottoms of his shoes by the time he finally got back to the frat house. When he entered his room, a card game was in progress. A table had been hauled in from the living room. 4 guys sat around it. Lou Wheeler, his roommate, was dealing and paused long enough to greet him, asking where he'd been. His future star had been trying to get hold of him. Barry shoved the door closed, sat on the edge of his bed, and said he'd been doing the duty call on the folks, trying to get them to come through with some bread for the summer, and his cell was dead. A boy on Lou's right glanced up in surprise, saying he thought Barry's old man was loaded. Barry said he was, but Mom dispensed it. It was a nightmare to drive through campus. They were having a fireworks display at the stadium, and there was a hell of a traffic jam. Lou said some kids were going to stage an anti-Memorial Day demonstration with black banners and the works. Who needed a day to honor war? He started sorting his hand and asked if Barry wasn't going to call Helen. She'd sounded pretty hot to see him. Barry said he'd call her in the morning. Lou whistled and asked if he was nuts or something, gesturing toward the dresser and telling him to get a load of that picture. Could they imagine putting off a hottie like that? There was general laughter and crude but good-natured remarks from the other players. Helen's picture became the subject for general study. One boy said if Barry was tired of her, just pass along her phone number. Barry said he just might do that. He too glanced at the picture and continued studying it after the others turned back to the game. It was Helen's junior class picture, the one she'd submitted to the TV station, enhanced by Photoshop. The hair was a little too gold, and the shade of the eyes was off. Across the bottom right corner, Helen had written in her round childish script, "With all my love, Heller." It had meant something when she gave it to him, but now it had become just another item on the dresser. He seldom looked at it, but had to admit it made a nice showpiece. Helen herself was a good showpiece, which was one reason he hadn't dropped her. He never expected their relationship to continue past high school. In fact, in the beginning, he never anticipated it becoming a relationship at all. He'd been driving home from school and saw her walking along the sidewalk, swinging her hips a little in that way she had. She was stacked. Even from the back he could tell that. When he pulled up beside her, he saw she was even better from the front. That first date was spur of the moment. She was a looker, available, and he didn't have other plans for the evening. Then his mother got into the act. She commented that a girl with a shape like that might at least wear a bra, and that hair color couldn't be natural. Nobody had hair that gold. With all the really nice girls around, Anne Stanton, the Webbers' pretty little daughter, did he really want to spend his time and money on someone like this? That of course cinched it. Barry said he liked her. Until that moment he hadn't really thought much about it. He added that she got around, which sent his mother into a spin. After that, he was publicly committed. Helen Rivers was his girl. He meant to wind the thing up before starting college. His original hope was that it would happen naturally when he left for an out-of-state school. That didn't work out. He wasn't offered a football scholarship anywhere tempting, and his mother decided he should attend the local university. She told him he'd be close. He could even live at home if he wanted, or at least come home on weekends if he pledged a fraternity. So he planned to make the break with Helen at summer's end. Then 2 things happened. First, the damned accident. Helen came to his defense like a real trooper. He knew it was doubtful Ray and Julie would have agreed to the pact if Helen hadn't been there pushing it. He owed her something for that and knew it, so he decided to postpone the breakup for a while. Then, out of the blue, came the future star bit. He had to admit it impressed him. All the publicity and glamour of having a girlfriend suddenly on television and known to everybody in town. It looked good to be seen around with the Channel 5 future star hanging on to him. People always pointed her out and came up to ask if she was really Helen Rivers. But enough was enough. The whole thing was getting far too clingy. A girl with looks like hers wasn't supposed to be insecure, yet Helen seemed an exception. She constantly asked for reassurance about outfits, her hair, whether she'd gained weight. Even worse, she'd started talking about marriage. Married, and here he was barely 19, never done anything, never been anywhere. He told her no dice. He had another 3 years of school before he could even think about it. She kept insisting that wouldn't matter. Lots of people got married in college, and she wouldn't mind working. In fact, she'd like it. He said screw that. He wouldn't want a wife of his working. It was the first response he could think of, and even to his own ears it sounded ridiculous. All married women worked, at least until they had babies. Would Helen expect children? Yes, probably she would. A screaming, puking infant as quickly as possible. Shuddering, he chided himself for his lack of guts. He should simply tell her he had a lot of living to do before putting down roots, and even then it wouldn't be with her. Sometimes Helen reminded him of his mother, which was crazy because you could search the world and never find two people with less in common. Still, when he was with them, he had the same feeling of near suffocation. Ray Bronson had taken off for a year, ditched college, bummed up and down the California coast, hardly keeping in touch. Over the past months, the thought of Ray filled Barry with raging envy, just the idea of being out from under his parents' rule with no pressure. But then the rational part of his mind would come forward. Sure, it sounded romantic. But who would really want one crappy little job after another? Waiting tables, washing cars, crewing on fishing boats, just to put food in your mouth and pay for a place to sleep? The fact had to be faced. If you wanted your parents to pay the bills, you lived the way they wanted. But Helen was something else. He didn't have to stick it out with her. It had been good for a while, but when a good thing became a drag, it was time to end it. Out in the hall, the telephone rang. After a few rings, it stopped. A knock came on the door. Someone called that Cox had a phone call. Lou said with ill-concealed envy that it was probably another female, asking what Barry had and would he sell the formula. Barry said charm, just charm. He got off the bed, passed the dresser, and flipped the picture onto its face. Tomorrow he'd get rid of it and wipe the slate clean. Meanwhile, he'd get the hard part over with, and by phone was better than face-to-face. He'd told Helen he'd call, and he hadn't, so she'd start with a chip on her shoulder. He could react to that, get mad at her for being unreasonable when she knew he was bogged down with studies. It wouldn't be a bad way to handle it. 2 frat brothers were coming down the hall as he reached the house phone. One good-naturedly told him to make it quick. He had a hot night to set up. Barry said he wouldn't be long. He could guarantee that, though there might be an explosion. The receiver dangled at the end of the cord. He fished it up, clapped it to his ear, and identified himself. A few moments later, he placed the receiver back on the hook and told the boys behind him it was all theirs. One looked at him with admiration and amazement, saying if he talked to his girl like that, she'd shoot him. Barry walked down the hall and out the side door into the parking area. The sky in the west over the stadium glowed with tiny red stars that flew wide apart, faded, and disappeared like drops of water on a hot griddle. A muffled cheer went up from the crowd watching the fireworks. He followed the sidewalk to its end, crossed the street, and entered the athletic field. At the far end, the bleachers loomed as a dark mass against the sky, thrown into abrupt silhouette as another rocket went up, and the audience roared approval. Barry stood still, trying to accustom his eyes to the sudden changes from light to dark. Then a flashlight suddenly went on right in front of him, the beam directed straight into his face. He raised his hands to protect his eyes, asking what the hell. There was enough noise from the fireworks that he wouldn't have known. The next sound was a gunshot. Except he felt the bullet tear through his stomach and into his spine. They all learned about it that night. Ray heard from his father. The booter, doing paperwork in his den while listening to a ball game on the radio, went upstairs and rapped on Ray's door, booming that a rotten thing had happened to a buddy of his. When Ray opened the door, his father told him about the news bulletin that had broken into the program. Barry William Cox, 19, a university freshman, had been found by a campus patrolman lying gravely wounded in the middle of the athletic field. Students in the area were being questioned, but no one remembered hearing a shot. One girl commented that with all the holiday fireworks, one more bang would hardly have been noticed. Another student, a fraternity brother of the Cox boy, reported having overheard a phone conversation shortly before the shooting. Barry was making arrangements to meet somebody, probably a girl. He was real short on the phone, like he was pissed off about something. According to the radio report, the injured man had been transported by ambulance to St. Joseph's Hospital. Ray immediately called the hospital and was told Barry was in surgery. No information about his condition was available. His second call was to Barry's parents' home. No answer. His third call was to Julie. Helen Rivers learned about the shooting in a bizarre manner. She was standing in the television studio waiting to deliver a weather report, filling in for the sick regular weatherman. To her horror, she heard the newscaster seated 6 feet away present the bulletin as part of the 10 o'clock news. Luckily, the camera wasn't on her face at the time. A few moments later, to her own amazement, she calmly informed viewers that the high that day had been 82, the low expected to be 68, and there had been some rain in the northern part of the state. Then, when the camera left her, she went into the ladies' room and descended into hysteria. Collie Wilson was watching the news program on the big screen TV in the common lounge of Four Seasons Apartments. When he heard the report, he got into his car and drove to the television studio. He told the first person he met that he'd come for Helen Rivers. The man said thank God, they had her lying down in the lounge, didn't know what to do. She wanted to go down to St. Joseph's. Collie said he was there to take her. The man led the way down a hall, through a door, and down another hall. Collie could hear Helen long before he reached her. When he came into the room, he wondered for a moment if he'd found the right person. The girl before him was a mess. Eyes red and swollen, mascara running down her cheeks in long black streaks, face contorted with weeping. He asked if she remembered him, her friend by the pool. He sat beside her, put his hands on her shoulders, and told her she'd better cut this out. It wasn't getting her anywhere. Did she want a ride to the hospital? Helen nodded, choking down sobs. He told her to get a hold of herself, go wash her face or something. She couldn't go anywhere looking like that. He'd wait in the lobby. He went out, and a few moments later Helen came out to meet him. She'd obeyed. Her face was clean, her hair brushed. Collie took her arm, steered her to the car, deposited her in the front seat, then got in beside her. He suggested she turn on the radio. There might be an update. Obediently, Helen reached over and pushed the button. Soft music filled the car. She started to turn the dial. He told her to leave it. That was the local news station. If there were any reports, that's where they'd get them. Helen sat back and spoke to him for the first time, her voice thin like a lost child's, asking how he knew. He said he'd been watching the Channel 5 news. He did that a lot lately because a friend on there gave the weather report sometimes. Helen said she couldn't believe it. Things like this just didn't happen. Why would anybody shoot Barry? Collie asked her to tell him. She knew the guy. Was he the kind to have enemies? Helen said promptly that Barry was the best. Everybody adored him. He was voted most popular in their senior class yearbook. She was the one all the girls hated because she was his girlfriend. Collie suggested maybe it was robbery. Helen said at the college? College kids didn't carry a lot of money. Dope? Barry didn't do drugs. Oh, he smoked a little weed now and then, but nothing hard. You didn't shoot somebody to get one joint. Her voice shook as she said she loved him, Collie. He loved her too. Someday they were going to get married when he got out of college, or even before. She didn't mind working. Collie said of course she didn't. She said he thought she'd mind. It was old-fashioned of him, but nice. He thought it wouldn't be right to marry somebody and have her work. He was just so marvelous. When she first met him 2 years ago, he picked her up walking home from school. He said she was pretty. Collie said he was right. At the moment the statement wasn't true, but he discounted that. He took his right hand from the wheel and reached over to give her an awkward pat on the shoulder, telling her to hang on now. Going to pieces like that back in the studio wouldn't help anything. She didn't seem like the kind of girl who fell apart in an emergency. Helen said she usually wasn't. It was just that this was Barry. He told her to hang in there. They'd be at the hospital in a few minutes, and then she'd know more. Whatever it was, she'd take it head on, okay? Helen reached up to touch his hand on her shoulder, asking if he'd come in with her. He said sure. They drove the rest of the way in silence, except for the music, which stopped when Collie turned the key to shut off the engine. The hospital lobby was all but deserted. The gray-uniformed woman at the admitting desk sent them to the second floor. A nurse directed them down the hall to a small waiting room where several people were already there. Helen cried out, "Mrs. Cox!" and broke away from Collie's side to rush over to a thin-faced blonde woman in a beige pantsuit. The portly, gray-haired man beside her with tired eyes began to rise automatically from force of habit, but the woman gestured him back down. She greeted Helen coolly, saying she was surprised to see her there. Helen exclaimed that she couldn't believe it. How could she not be here? Her eyes filled and she reached out as though to embrace the woman. Mrs. Cox drew back slightly and gestured toward the others with them, introducing her friends the Crawfords, and then telling them this was Helen Rivers, a classmate of Barry's from last year. Helen said, "How do you do?" then turned to Collie and introduced him as a friend who lived in the same apartment complex. Mrs. Cox said Barry had lots of friends, and she was glad most had the good taste not to come trooping down here. This wasn't a circus, there was nothing to see. It was her boy in there, terribly hurt, maybe dying. Abruptly she raised her hands and covered her face, her rings twinkling under the overhead light. Watching her, Collie wondered how she ever managed to use her hands as encumbered as they were. Mr. Cox put an arm around his wife's shoulders, gruffly telling her to chin up, then turned to Helen and said she'd have to forgive her. She was very upset, they all were. It was thoughtful for her and her friend to come down, but he thought it might be better if they kept it to close friends and family, at this point anyway. Helen's face went white. She repeated that Mrs. Cox said Barry might be dying. Mr. Cox said he had the best care, the best doctors. Helen asked what they were doing to him in there. Mrs. Cox cried out to send her away, asking how much of this they had to be put through. If Helen hadn't phoned him, hadn't insisted on dragging him out to meet her, this wouldn't have happened. Helen asked what she meant, then turned to Mr. Cox. Barry's father said they weren't blaming her. They knew the last thing on her mind was bringing harm to Barry. Nevertheless, it was her phone call that brought him out onto the playing field in the dark. She wasn't directly responsible, but if she had left him alone, let him stay in the frat house and study, which he should have been doing. Helen said in confusion that she didn't talk to him tonight. She called once early that evening. She wanted to tell him something somebody had done, a thing on her door. She brought herself under control with an effort and explained that he was supposed to call her this weekend, he promised, and when he didn't, she had to tell him. But he wasn't there. She called about 5, he was out, and she left word for him to call back, but he didn't. Mrs. Crawford spoke up quietly and not unkindly, saying they were set for a long wait. The Coxes had Helen's number, she was sure. They'd see she was called when there was something definite to report. In the meanwhile, she thought Helen had better go. Helen started to protest that she wasn't just a school friend. She was more, a lot more, her voice rising sharply. Collie said softly that he thought they'd better go somewhere else to wait. People here were upset enough. Helen began to say she didn't understand. Gently he took her arm, turned her around, and told her to come on. Nobody spoke to call them back. Still holding her arm, he steered her down the hall to the elevator, saying there were other waiting rooms. They'd sit in the lobby and have that whole place to themselves. She could yell or cry or anything, and it wouldn't bother anybody. Helen said she didn't want to yell. She wanted to wait outside surgery, where the news would come. She wasn't just anybody. She was Barry's girlfriend, the one he was going to marry someday. Collie said maybe so, but his mother didn't seem to be in on the secret. He pressed the elevator button, and as they rode down he didn't loosen his hold on her arm. Julie James placed the receiver back on the hook and went into the living room, telling her mother that somebody had shot Barry Cox. Mrs. James, kneeling on the floor cutting around a dress pattern, straightened up with a gasp, asking if that was the boy who went out with Helen. Julie said that was Ray on the phone. He heard it on the radio. No, his dad heard it. It happened over at the U on the athletic field. They didn't know who did it. Her voice was flat and emotionless with shock. Mrs. James said she was afraid there might be trouble over there tonight. That Memorial Day fireworks display should never have been held on campus, not with student unrest the way it was. The 6 o'clock news mentioned some students gathering for a demonstration, but for them to have taken it this far, to have one of her friends injured, was just incredible. She asked if he was badly hurt. Julie said Ray didn't know. He called the hospital and they wouldn't tell him anything. She dropped to her knees beside her mother. The pink dress on the floor was to be for her. The bright material swam before her eyes. She asked if her mother thought it was the war demonstration, if somebody could have had a gun there. Her mother asked what other answer there could be. Helen awoke to the sound of a motor running. The waking was gradual. At first the sound lurked at the back of her consciousness as part of a dream. Then it seemed to grow louder until the dream was lost in the roar. She became aware that she was in bed and the sound was outside herself. She opened her eyes to find the room flooded with morning sunlight. Below her window, the Four Seasons caretaker was cutting grass with a power mower. She thought in amazement that she'd slept. How could she have slept so hard when Barry? Just the thought of his name brought her to a sitting position. The happy face alarm clock showed 10:15. The morning was half over. She'd been asleep for over 6 hours. It had been 3 in the morning when Barry was moved from surgery to recovery, and the Coxes and their friends stepped from the elevator into the lobby. Helen, seated in a chair opposite the elevator door, had sprung to her feet. Mr. Cox told her wearily that they got the bullet. It was lodged in the spine. How much damage it did, they couldn't tell yet. She asked if he was going to live. He said prognosis was good, he came through surgery well. He was a strong boy. The doctor seemed to think he'd make it all right. Weak with relief, Helen put out a hand to steady herself against the chair back, saying, oh thank God, she'd been praying, hadn't stopped since she heard the news at the TV studio. Mr. Cox thanked her and said they were grateful for her concern. Mrs. Cox and the Crawfords had crossed to the far side of the lobby. Mrs. Cox's face was white and drawn. For the first time since meeting her, Helen thought the woman looked older than her husband. Helen asked if they were going home now. Mr. Cox said yes, his wife was exhausted. The doctor said there was no reason to remain. It would be hours before Barry's anesthetic wore off, and much longer than that before he could have visitors. He suggested they try to get some sleep, and that should apply to her too. He turned to Collie, who had risen to stand at Helen's side, and asked if he'd see she got home. Collie said of course, he brought her down. Helen said she wouldn't be able to sleep, that she didn't think she'd ever sleep again. But she had. The golden light of mid-morning proved that. She had slept so hard that her body ached from being so long in one position, and when she got out of bed her legs felt rubbery. She went out to the telephone in the living room and dialed the hospital. The voice that answered told her Barry Cox was resting comfortably. He had been removed from recovery and was now in room 414B. For the time being, no visitors except family were allowed. Helen insisted she was sure he would want to see her. Would they ask him? Tell him it was Helen. The voice asked if she was a member of the immediate family. She said not exactly. Asked her relationship to the patient. She said she was a friend, a very good friend. The orders land like a locked door. No visitors for Mr. Cox except immediate family. Helen mutters her frustration into the receiver, already certain who engineered the rule. Barry's mother. The previous night rushes back in nightmare fragments. The TV station announcement, Collie's arrival, the hospital drive, and the cold, sharp hatred in Mrs. Cox's eyes. She'd cried out her defense then, that she never called Barry, never dragged him anywhere. Mr. Cox had said they weren't blaming her, but both parents' eyes said otherwise. Now, alone in the empty apartment, Helen hears her own voice sound strange as she insists aloud. She didn't call Barry to the playing field, didn't speak to him at all last night. Yet a fraternity brother's statement confirmed a phone call did happen. Someone reached Barry, someone whose request seemed urgent enough to pull him out immediately. Helen's mind circles the question, who called and why? Could there be another girl? She answers herself firmly. No, of course not. She's Barry's only girlfriend. If she can't trust him, who can she trust? But small, odd things from the past year surface, nothing major alone but troubling when stacked together. Her mind drifts to the conversation with Elsa on the night of the accident. That's how Helen always frames it. The accident, fate's hand, unpreventable. One moment she and Barry were relaxed and happy, her head on his shoulder, the radio playing soft music. The next, the child appeared in front of the car. Barry couldn't have done anything. No time to get his arm back from around her and onto the wheel. Even with both hands free, he probably couldn't have swerved in time. Ray called 911. It wasn't Barry's fault that the 10-year-old boy was injured beyond help. A child had no business riding a bike on a mountain road in the middle of the night. None of their faults. Still, terrifying. She'd cried on the way home. When she crept inside to avoid waking her parents, she hadn't expected Elsa still awake, reading. Elsa spotted the red eyes immediately and accused Helen of crying. Laid her magazine aside with near triumph, asked if Barry had broken up with her. Wondered aloud how long it would take him to get around to it. Helen denied everything, claimed smoke in the car, insisted everything was fine. Elsa pressed, if not tonight, soon. Barry was starting college in a couple of months. Helen didn't see what difference that made. The university was right in town, he could see her every night. But Elsa argued that Barry was a catch. Good-looking, money, football hero, every girl's dream guy. College offered sexy, real women with brains and background. How would Helen stack up? Helen said Barry loved her. Elsa pointed out he'd never actually said those words. Helen countered that he'd picked her over plenty of other girls in high school. Elsa dismissed high school as different. Guys wanted kid things then, big boobs and highlighted hair. College guys looked for quality. Helen called her cruel, accused her of jealousy. Boys never liked Elsa, never had anyone like Barry. Elsa claimed not jealousy, but pity. Helen insisted Barry wasn't going to drop her. She might not have high society background or money, but she had a lot to offer. When Elsa asked for an example, Helen floundered. Elsa told her to dream on and picked her magazine back up. The next day, Helen had entered her junior class picture, a good one showing her fine bones, shining hair, bright smile, in the Channel 5 Future Star Contest. The smartest move she ever made. A rap at the door jolts her back. Collie's voice comes through, just checking how she got through the night. She hurries to grab a robe, catches her reflection, stops to comb her hair and apply lipstick. Collie might be platonic, but he's still male. When she opens the door, his eyes register that fact. He'd expected her haggard and baggy-eyed, but admits he was wrong. She tells him she did sleep, doesn't know how, but she did. She offers coffee. He's already had some, on his way to his parents' place. He asks if she called the hospital yet. She reports Barry is out of recovery and in a private room, resting comfortably, whatever that means. Collie guesses she'll go after her webcast. She tells him visitors aren't permitted. He asks if Barry's still critical. She doesn't know, irritation rising. Nobody tells her anything. She'd call the Coxes, but suspects Mrs. Cox would answer and hang up. Collie asks her not to blame Mrs. Cox too much. The woman wasn't all there last night. Mothers get that way when something happens to a kid. Helen reminds him she was upset too. Probably as upset as Mrs. Cox. The family gets to see Barry. She's tempted to go down and pass herself off as his sister. Collie warns her no chance. Anyone with a TV will recognize her before she speaks. Then his expression turns serious. There's something he wants to ask. Last night on the way to the hospital, she'd said Barry didn't have enemies. They ruled out robbery, drugs. That leaves nothing, no reason for the shooting at all. Helen says she doesn't even want to think about it. Collie presses. She needs to think about it. She knows Barry better than anyone. If he was mixed up in something shady, selling pills. She cuts him off, no question in her mind. Collie concedes it didn't have to be that, just the first possibility. But people don't usually get shot for nothing. A gun going off during cleaning, a hunter mistaking a person for a deer, that happens. But a guy lured out by a phone call? That's planned. Helen doesn't believe it. Collie asks what she believes if she has an answer. She's the one with the best chance of figuring it out, at least until Barry can talk. She can't think of anything. He taps her chin, tells her to keep it up, enjoy her coffee, and leaves. She pushes the door shut, hears it click, walks away, then slowly turns back and slides the bolt. Back in the bedroom, the lawnmower's sound fades as the caretaker moves across the way. Sunlight has shifted. Gold shafts fall across the rumpled bed and touch the alarm clock. On the dresser, Barry's picture reigns, surrounded by moisturizer, blush compact, eyeshadow palette. Helen crosses to the dresser, opens the top drawer. She hesitates at the opening, afraid. Then she reaches inside with an unsteady hand and draws out the magazine picture of the little boy on the bicycle. School lets out, and Julie finds Ray waiting in the parking lot, the same far corner he used the year before when he was still a student. She isn't surprised. Somehow she expected him. Breaking from the crowd, she turns automatically toward that spot, crosses to the car, tosses her books inside, and climbs in beside them just like she did so many times in the past year. She greets him by noting how strange it feels to see him driving his dad's car. Ray explains his father has been great about letting him use it. Morning drop-off at the store, his mom picking up at night. It's odd, he admits, because his dad was furious about Ray taking off last fall. The older man couldn't understand why Ray would blow off school and leave, and of course Ray couldn't explain it well. Julie asks what happened to his own car. Ray tells her he and Barry hammered out the dent and sold it to a farmer near Hobbs. He took a loss but was glad to be rid of it. He starts the engine and asks where she wants to go. Anywhere, she says. It doesn't matter. He suggests the picnic place. She refuses so fast the words blur together. Henry's for a snack? He asks if she's hungry. No, but they have to go somewhere, and that's as good as anywhere. It isn't, they soon discover. Henry's is running a 2-for-1 hot fudge sundae special, and the lot is nearly full. Car horns honk, a huge line snakes from the window. Junior high kids climb over car windows and sit on hoods shouting, while older students yell at them to quiet down. Ray asks again about the picnic place. Julie nods, defeated. No choice. They drive in silence up the curving road. Passing one particular spot, Julie squeezes her eyes shut and bites hard on her lower lip. They climb until they reach the Cibola National Forest sign. Then Ray turns down a narrow dirt road away from the cleared picnic area. Branches scrape both sides of the car. A squirrel darts across in front of them as they reach the stream and stop near the bank. Neither speaks for a long moment. Finally, Ray says it's still the same. Julie nods. The thin silver water winds down from the rocks, disappearing into evergreens. Yellow flowers push from the fresh spring earth. Above the trees, the sky arches in a high, rich blue. Ray recalls a sliver of moon caught in that pine tree's branches. Does she remember? She doesn't want to remember anything about that night. Ray insists she has to. They have to think, to decide together what to do. Julie asks why. It's been almost a year. He says no, not really. She asks what he means. He tells her she can't shove something like this under a rug, especially now after what happened to Barry. Julie pulls her hand from under his and folds both hands in her lap. What happened to Barry has nothing to do with the other thing. He was shot during a student demonstration. Ray corrects her. No, he wasn't. There was no shooting during last night's demonstration. Julie starts to say what her mom thinks, but Ray cuts her off. The demonstration was peaceful, just kids carrying signs. They sat in the road a while. People had trouble getting their cars out after the fireworks. No violence, not even a cherry bomb. Julie wants to drop it. She doesn't feel like rehashing. Ray says her name sharply. They have to talk. She gives in, turning her face to his. The pain in her eyes is so deep he almost regrets forcing the issue. Fine. If he insists on talking about that night, then yes, there was a moon in that pine tree. Yes, it was a beautiful picnic. Yes, they killed a little boy. Is there anything more? Ray says there's Barry. Julie sits quiet, digesting that. Then she says it slowly. Ray thinks Barry was shot deliberately by someone who knew what happened. By the same person who wrote her the note and sent him the clipping. Ray confirms it. She asks about a clipping. She didn't know about any clipping. He explains it came Saturday, mailed in the same block printing as her note. Ray pulls out his wallet, unfolds a newspaper column, and hands it to her. Julie takes one glance and hands it back. She doesn't need to read it. She remembers it word for word. Ray asks about Helen. Has she received anything in the mail? Julie says no, not in the mail, but something happened. She talked to Helen Sunday. Helen thought Barry might have done it. A trick. What was it? A magazine picture taped to her door, happened Saturday. Helen was sitting by the pool when a new neighbor came out and pulled up a chair. They talked a while, then Helen worried about sunburn and went inside. When she got up to her apartment, someone had taped a picture of a boy on a bicycle to her door. She thought maybe Barry had dropped over, seen her with another guy, and decided to teach her a lesson. Ray comments that doesn't sound like Barry. He plays around too much to have any right to be jealous over Helen. Julie points out Helen doesn't know that. Helen doesn't date other people. And not having the right to be jealous doesn't stop someone from feeling that way. She admits it sounds unlikely, but that's what Helen thought. Helen told her that if Barry didn't call by noon Monday, she was going to phone him and have it out. Ray wonders aloud if that was what drew Barry onto the athletic field, a phone call from Helen. Julie says it could have been. The morning paper said he received a call from someone right before he left the fraternity house, and then he was shot. Julie looks at Ray with horror. He doesn't think it was Helen. That's ridiculous. Helen worships Barry. Ray agrees of course not. Helen wouldn't pick up a gun, much less pull a trigger, and she's crazy about him. He's just thinking out loud, looking at all sides. If it wasn't Helen's call, Julie says, someone else must have known about it. Barry isn't exactly the most faithful boyfriend. There could be other girls from the university with jealous boyfriends. Or it could be a totally unconnected accident, some freak on a bad trip walking around with a gun, not caring who got hurt. You read about things like that. Ray admits it's possible, but it would be a strange coincidence after what the three of them have received. Barry was the one driving that night. Julie notes he's the only one who didn't receive any memento of the accident, at least as far as they know. Ray says Barry received a bullet. The words hang between them in the soft spring sunshine. Julie shudders. All right, suppose the person who shot Barry is the same one sending the notes, pictures, and clippings, someone who knows about the accident. Then why wait so long? And why do something like this when all he ever had to do from the beginning was report them to the police? Ray admits he can't answer the waiting part. As for the other, Whoever it is would have to hate them so much he wants to kill them himself, rather than let the authorities punish them some other way. Julie asks shakily who could hate like that. Ray guesses whoever was closest to the kid. His parents? That figures. He knows how his own folks would feel, or Julie's mom. But again, the waiting. If the parents somehow found out, and he still doesn't see how they could have, why wait almost a year to act? Julie adds, and how would they have known about Helen's phone call? If it was Helen's call, they don't even know that for sure. Ray says that's the one thing they can find out without trouble. Just ask Helen. And once Barry can have visitors, they can find out a whole lot more. Barry might have even seen the person who shot him. Julie objects, at night on a dark field? Ray counters that the person saw him. There must have been enough light to aim a gun. Julie glances at her watch. Helen's still at the studio, usually home around 5. They should go over then and see what she has to tell them. Ray agrees. They can kill half an hour here first. He suggests getting out and walking along the bank like they used to. He's thought about this place so often during the past year. California's sunshine and white beaches, and he kept remembering the pine smell and the stream and his own girl with him. He knows he's pushed too far. He sees Julie stiffen. She says no, then asks him to give her the clipping. He pulls it from his wallet again, letting the wallet hang open an extra moment so Julie can see her own picture smiling out at them. A year-old shot of her in jeans and a tank top, hair loose and bouncy, eyes crinkled with laughter. As Ray hands over the clipping, he realizes with a jolt how much Julie's eyes have changed since that photograph. No laughter remains in them now. They are eyes that haven't laughed in a long time. Julie takes the article, careful not to brush his hand, and smooths it flat. She reads aloud the name and address of Daniel Gregg's parents. The location hits her, one of those little roads just south of where the accident happened. Ray agrees, since the boy was presumably riding home from a friend's house. Then Julie draws a long breath and announces she wants to go there, to his house. Ray stares at her in disbelief. Why would she want to do something so sick? Julie counters that it's no sicker than coming up here to the picnic spot. He's the one insisting they need to face this, relive it, figure out what's happening. If they're going to do that, she thinks they ought to see his house and talk with his parents. Ray is certain he's mishearing her. Just walk up, ring the bell, announce they were in the car that ran down the boy and ask how the parents feel about it. She's out of her mind. Julie sharpens her tone. She doesn't mean that at all, and she's not out of her mind. They've agreed the people with the most right to hate them are the boy's mother and father. How will they ever find out about those parents if they don't see them? Ray reminds her she said talk with them. Julie explains. Talk, yes, but not about the accident. Couldn't they go to the door, introduce themselves, claim car trouble and dead cell phones, ask to use the phone? If the Greggs aren't the ones after them, the parents would never know the difference. Just think a couple of teenagers had been up there parking and couldn't get down again. Ray asks what if the Greggs are the ones after them? Julie says they'd know it. At least she's sure she would. When the parents saw them, heard their names, it would show on their faces. The shock of seeing the two of them appear on the doorstep could send the parents straight for their gun, Ray finishes. If these people shot Barry, wouldn't they like to add 2 more to the list? Julie shakes her head. In their own front yard? Broad daylight, neighbors around. It's different from Barry's situation. Besides, she still can't believe someone's out to kill them all. She still thinks it's a drug freak. And Barry just happened into the wrong place at the wrong time, like Daniel Gregg did. Ray doesn't like it. It's sick. He doesn't want to see those parents. But Julie's voice goes low and firm. The same voice that declared a year ago that whatever she and Ray had was over, that she was breaking free of him, of the others, of everything that would remind her of that awful night. She meant that then, and she means this now. She wants to see them. If they're facing this, let's really face it. She's going to that house. If Ray wants to take her, fine. If not, she'll take her mother's car and drive up there herself. The house sits among a cluster of small masonry homes almost at the end of a narrow, unpaved road east of the mountain highway. Each is white with a pitched roof, half lost in mountain shadow, set close to the road as if grateful for the connection to civilization. They pass once to check the number, then drive slowly back, park down the road and begin walking. With every step, Julie feels her heart contract. By the time they reach the house again, she feels physically ill. Ray touches her arm, asking if she's sure. She says she's sure, but actually she's no longer sure at all. The plan that seemed so reasonable moments ago now feels ridiculous. What if the Greggs really are the ones who shot Barry and mailed the notes and clippings? What if they recognize the names Julie James and Raymond Bronson? What if their desire for revenge is so great they don't care about consequences and do something violent? Or almost as bad? What if they simply stand in the doorway shoulder to shoulder, tears running down their faces, asking why the two of them ran down their son and never even came back to say sorry? Julie stares at the house. This is where Daniel Gregg lived. Ordinary enough, but the front yard looks bedraggled, uncared for. Patches of grass grow with bare earth showing between. Flower beds under the windows still hold brown stalks from last year's garden. Along one side of the roof, faded trim shows bright yellow where repainting has begun, and a ladder leans against the wall. Ray says, "Come on if she's coming." Impatient words but a nervous voice. She hurries to catch up. They mount the cement step. Ray presses the doorbell hard. The door stands half open. Through the screen they see simple living room furnishings. A green chair, the end of an overstuffed couch, a coffee table with magazines. Across the room, an old portable TV on a stand. Despite the open door, the place feels empty. Ray presses the bell again. They listen as the sound rings through the house. No answer. He sounds relieved. Nobody's home. Julie insists someone has to be here. People don't leave their houses open like this. Ray suggests Mr. Gregg is probably at work, and maybe his wife works too, or went next door. A voice comes from directly behind them. "Are you looking for me?" Making them both jump as if caught at something guilty. They turn simultaneously to find a short, plump, pretty girl no more than a few years older than Julie. She explains she was at the side of the house taking down the wash, their dryer broken. She thought she heard the bell but wasn't sure. Can she help them with something? Julie says they were hoping to use the phone, and Ray adds their car is having trouble up the road. The girl invites them in, holds the door open. The phone is around the corner in the hall, with a directory on a nail. Ray heads that way, thanking her. The girl adds that her father could probably get the car started if he were here. He's great with motors. She smiles at Julie. A wide, sweet smile that lights up her face in a way Julie finds disturbingly familiar. Julie asks if she knows her, apologizing for the question but swearing she's seen the girl somewhere. The girl easily suggests maybe from her job. She's a hairdresser at the Bon Marche on Central, has done half the town's hair at one time or another. Her name is Megan. Julie introduces herself and Ray, thanking her for the help. Megan's smile doesn't waver. Nothing changes in her wide, dark eyes. She says she's glad to have people drop by. Her mother always says she can talk the ears off a rabbit, which is probably why she likes beauty work, talking to people all day. Today is her regular day off, and they didn't work yesterday because of the holiday, and the day before that was Sunday, and with her folks out of town, she's been ready to climb the walls. Would they like some iced tea? They'll probably have a while to wait for help with the car, since they're pretty far out. Julie says tea would taste good. She follows Megan from the living room into a small, bright kitchen with pale yellow walls, a kitten calendar under a clock. A magazine on the table lies open to advertisements, as if the recent reader was trying to while away empty hours. Megan pulls a plastic container of tea from the refrigerator and pours 3 tall glasses. She offers sugar. Julie declines for herself and assumes Ray will too. Julie takes the glass from Megan's small, square hand. One thing is certain, Julie thinks. This girl isn't involved in this thing at all. She couldn't have anything to do with the attack on Barry, and she doesn't recognize their names. She's as open and friendly as can be. Megan picks up the remaining 2 glasses and suggests they carry them outside while she finishes taking down the wash. She's the only one home now. Her folks gone, her older brother out of the nest, so laundry and cooking fall to her. She keeps telling herself she'll lose weight this way because she hates cooking for herself. But it doesn't work out like that. The highest calorie foods are the easiest to fix. Julie asks where her parents are. Megan leads her out the kitchen door into the backyard, a pleasant yard with a redwood picnic table, a charcoal grill, a tool shed beyond, all enclosed by shaggy trees. To the left, a clothesline stretched between 2 trees holds blouses, slacks, and a couple of bed sheets waving in the breeze. Megan sets the glasses on the picnic table and crosses to the line. Her parents are in Las Lunas. Her mother isn't well, in a hospital there. Her father moved down to be near her, staying in a boarding house so he can see her every day. The doctors say that's good for her. Julie moves to help Megan fold a sheet, asking if her mother has been ill long. Megan explains her mother has been in a rest home for about 2 months, not physically ill, but emotional. Her little brother was killed last July. Daniel Gregg. Julie feels the old sickness rise in her throat, saying she thinks she did read about it. Megan continues. Her mother blamed herself. Danny had called wanting to be picked up after a fight with a friend, but she said no, told him to work it out. He got on his bike alone late at night without proper lights. Someone came roaring around the bend and hit him. The police thought it might have been teenagers coming down from the Silver Springs picnic ground. A ranger had seen 4 kids up there partying, 2 boys and 2 girls, but not close enough to describe them. The emergency operator thought the caller sounded like a teenage boy, but couldn't be certain. Julie's hands shake as she grips a clothespin. She asks about Megan's mother. Megan explains her mother fell apart. Danny was the youngest, the only child of her mother's second marriage, and they all doted on and spoiled him. That's why her mother wouldn't pick him up that night. She and her husband had agreed to stop giving in. When Danny came on his own and got killed, her mother blamed herself. Julie exclaims she couldn't have known what would happen. Megan agrees. They kept telling her that, but she dwelled on it until she'd convinced herself she'd all but killed Danny herself by not going to get him. A couple of months ago, she snapped. One morning she couldn't get out of bed, wouldn't talk. Now she's away getting help. Julie says it's awful, her voice trembling. She glances toward the house, silently begging Ray to come get her out of this. She doesn't want to listen anymore. Megan keeps folding laundry, describing Danny as a sweet but stubborn kid who'd do anything for you. He called her Sissy from when he couldn't say sister. She stops at the sight of Julie's face, apologizing for rattling on about family problems to a perfect stranger. Julie can barely get the words out. She's so terribly sorry for all of them. Megan touches her hand, guessing Julie has lost someone too. Julie says she's an only child but lost her father many years ago. Megan says it does get easier, must get easier. Julie says it fades. You stop thinking about it all the time but never really forget. Even now, at 6 o'clock when other fathers come home from work, she finds herself glancing at the front door. One evening, a guy she dates stopped by around that time and she heard his footsteps. He walks like her father used to, a kind of double-time stride. She breaks off as Ray appears in the kitchen doorway. He says he had to try calling a couple of places. Julie can see by his eyes the lie doesn't come easily. He finally got someone on the way. Megan points out the iced tea on the table. Ray thanks her but says they'd better get back to the car, asking Julie if she's ready. Julie says yes, silently adding yes, yes, yes. She thanks Megan. Megan says selfishly she's glad they had car trouble. She's been dying for someone to talk to. Julie hopes her mother gets better soon, knowing how inadequate the words are. Megan believes she will. Good doctors, and her father there with her. She invites Julie to the Bon Marche to let her do her hair. Julie thanks her and says maybe she will. Ray's hand is on her arm. They say goodbye and start toward the road as Megan calls after them that she hopes nothing too serious is wrong with their car. They don't speak until they're in the car. Ray starts the engine and says in a low voice that the two of them sure got friendly fast, asking about the mother. Julie keeps her voice low so it won't carry back. Megan is the Gregg's daughter. Mrs. Gregg holds herself responsible for Daniel's accident, had a breakdown, and is in a hospital south of here. Ray says painfully that it never ends. Julie continues. Mr. Gregg is down there with her, and Megan is here alone. She fights back tears. They didn't just kill a little boy. They wrecked a whole family. Ray mutters that every life is entwined with other people's, like Barry's with his parents and Helen's and even with theirs. He asks if she's sorry they came. Julie says yes. She wishes she didn't know. Before, these people were just names in a newspaper article. Now they're real. She'll never get Megan out of her mind, standing there taking down laundry, talking about her little brother, and how he used to call her Sissy. She wipes her eyes. But there's one thing. Now they can be sure the Greggs didn't have anything to do with what happened to Barry. Ray asks how she gets that. Julie says Megan couldn't have, not the way she acted, and her parents haven't been here for months. They've been down in Los Lunas. Ray asks if she told Julie that. Yes, which is why she seems so lonesome, living there alone. Ray finds that funny. The house trim has been painted all the way to the peak of the roof. Megan is such a short little thing. He doesn't see how she could reach that far. Julie suggests a neighbor might be helping her, surprised at his observation, asking what difference it makes. Ray says none, but something else bothers him. If she's living there alone, why were a man's shirts hanging on the line? Julie offers that she might wear them herself. A lot of girls wear their father's shirts to mess around in. She doesn't have a father, so she wouldn't, but many of her friends do. Ray says okay, she's made her point. Julie can see her nervous chatter is beginning to irritate him. In a small voice, she says she liked Megan, really did, and she thinks Megan liked her. Ray counters that doesn't mean Megan's father isn't capable of picking up a gun and shooting somebody. Daniel was Mr. Gregg's only natural child. Megan and any other kids are from Mrs. Gregg's previous marriage. A man in that position would have a damned good reason for going off his rocker. Julie insists her father isn't there. He hasn't been for months. Doesn't Ray believe that? Ray says wearily he doesn't know. He honestly doesn't know what he believes anymore. Ray turns the car into the Four Seasons parking lot. Following Julie around the pool and up to the second-floor apartments, he admits to himself he's impressed. He murmurs that Helen really seems to have hit the big time as Julie presses the buzzer. The interior is done in blues, greens, and lavender. Helen herself seems little changed from the past year, except maybe even prettier. She greets them with obvious relief, grasping their hands and giving Ray a quick kiss on the cheek. She loves men with beards. She leads them into the living room where a pale, heavy-set girl sits on the sofa. Helen introduces Elsa as her sister and Ray as a friend from high school. Ray says he's glad to meet Elsa, privately deciding just the opposite. It seems incredible that this dumpy, sullen-faced girl could be related to someone as attractive as Helen. Elsa greets Julie and comments that she looks unwell, lost some weight maybe. Julie says they didn't plan to stay long, just wanted to hear what Helen's heard about Barry and didn't know she'd have company. Elsa says she was just leaving anyway, shifting heavily to her feet. She came by for the same reason. When she read the morning paper, she couldn't believe it. Told their mother that Barry Cox got shot, Helen's boyfriend, and said she'd better stop over after work to see how Helen was taking it, expecting her to be a wreck. Helen admits she was one last night when Collie drove her to the hospital. Elsa's sharp eyes brighten with interest at the name Collie. Helen explains he's a nice guy down the hall, heard the report on TV, knew how she'd take it, and came to the studio to get her. The Coxes were at the hospital, Barry was in surgery, they didn't know if he'd live, it was awful, but today things are better. Ray says he called the hospital this morning. They wouldn't tell him much, but did say Barry was out of recovery. Helen called too, and again that afternoon. Elsa comments she's surprised Helen isn't down there with him now, since to hear her talk she's practically engaged to him. Helen says Barry needs his rest, strain in her voice as she thanks Elsa for coming. Elsa says of course she came, her sister's boyfriend shot in the stomach, like something out of a movie. She begins reluctantly moving toward the door. Helen steps ahead to open it. Elsa pauses again, relaying their mother's offer. Come home for a couple of days where she can feed Helen and give her hot tea, afraid she won't eat by herself. Helen refuses, says she's doing fine. She holds the door wider, says goodbye, asks Elsa to give her love to the rest of the family. Elsa says their mother will call tonight since Helen doesn't want to come home, worried about how she's taking this. She says goodbye to Julie and tells Ray it's nice to have met him. The words keep coming until Helen pushes the door closed and leans against it with exaggerated exhaustion. She sighs relief, never so glad to see anyone in her life as when they walked in. She was afraid she'd be stuck with Elsa all night. Ray comments that Elsa doesn't bear much resemblance to her. Helen says too sure, which is why she was in such a hurry to move into her own place. It wasn't to get away from her parents, but from sharing a room with Elsa. She collapses onto the sofa Elsa just vacated, explaining Elsa was waiting when she came back from the studio, and has been there ever since, going over every grim detail and asking awful questions. Helen actually thinks Elsa is enjoying the situation. She's never liked Barry, and now she gets to brag to everyone at the store that her almost brother-in-law was shot down in cold blood. Ray asks if she's really going to the hospital tonight. Are they allowing visitors? Helen says only family, and she doesn't qualify, at least not when she asked that morning. She just told Elsa that to get her off her back. Julie agrees she should be able to see him, suggesting the Coxes could take her in. Helen gives a rueful laugh. That's the last way she'll ever get in. Mrs. Cox practically ordered her out of the waiting room last night, even accused her of making the phone call that brought Barry onto the athletic field. Ray asks directly, then she didn't make the call? When the paper said someone called Barry, Helen confirms it wasn't her. Ray says then she doesn't know any more than they do. They were hoping she could clear things up. Helen says the only thing, then stops. Ray presses. She mentions the magazine picture on her door and the note someone sent Julie. Ray adds the clipping sent to him, the newspaper account of the accident received Saturday. Helen's eyes widen. She asks if Ray thinks there's a connection to what happened to Barry, then immediately says she doesn't want to believe that. Ray says neither does Julie. She's doing everything to convince herself otherwise. Julie says in a low voice that no, she's finally convinced, now that they know it wasn't Helen who made that call. Somebody had to have made it. But she doesn't believe it was one of the Gregs. Ray demands who else could it be. Julie suggests someone who hated Barry for some other reason entirely. Helen insists that's impossible. Nobody could hate Barry. She knows him better than anybody. After 2 years together, he doesn't have an enemy in the world. Julie opens her mouth as if to respond, thinks better of it, and closes it. She turns to Ray and asks what they ought to do. Ray votes. They go to the police and tell the whole story. What they should have done in the beginning. Helen exclaims they can't. They made a pact. Ray says they can dissolve it if all three agree. Helen refuses, calls it a shitty suggestion. Just because Barry's flat on his back in the hospital where he can't stand up for himself, Ray wants to throw him to the wolves. Ray gets angry. When they made the pact, they never guessed something like this would happen. If the person who shot Barry did it for revenge, why stop with one of the 4 of them? Next time it will be her or Julie or him. Helen argues that if Barry wasn't shot for that reason, just a crazy accident because some college freak was high and waving a pistol, then Ray would be reporting him for nothing. Barry would get out of the hospital and face a prison sentence. Hasn't he suffered enough? Julie asks if they could talk to Barry. He's bound to know what happened. Helen asks bitterly how they propose to get into the hospital. If she can't see him, how can they? Ray suggests by phone. No phone in his room, Helen already asked. Julie asks about his parents. They get in to see him. Surely Barry must have told them who called him. Helen says they think it was her. Julie counters that they may have thought that last night before talking to Barry. By now they may know the truth. Ray volunteers to call and ask them. Helen asks why not. Barry and Ray have been friends a long time. Ray tried to call Barry's folks last night when he first heard, but they weren't there. Helen says go ahead, nothing to lose. At least he may find out more details about how Barry is. Ray gets up, goes to the telephone. Helen gives the number, on the front cover of the phone directory written in red, the blue one, the frat house. Ray dials. A low male voice answers immediately. Ray identifies himself. The man's voice sounds older than Ray remembers. The man recognizes him, Ray, Barry's friend, and says he didn't know Ray was still in town. Ray explains he just got back from California a few days ago, hadn't even had a chance to see Barry before the shooting. A bunch of Barry's friends are shaken up, so Ray offered to call and see how things are going. Mr. Cox reports Barry will pull through. No doubt now. He and his wife were at the hospital that afternoon, and Barry seemed much stronger than that morning. Ray sincerely says that's great and asks if Barry will be playing ball again next fall. Mr. Cox hesitates, then says there's some question. The bullet lodged in Barry's spine, a tricky area. An injury there can cause paralysis. Ray can't hide the horror in his voice. Barry might be paralyzed? Mr. Cox says not necessarily. They'll pray not. At the moment, that condition does seem to exist below the waist, but it could be temporary. Barry hasn't been told anything. There's no sense worrying him until he's stronger, and by then there may be no need. Ray hopes so. Mr. Cox thanks him for calling and says he'll tell Barry Ray wishes him well. Ray hesitantly asks if he might be able to see Barry. It's been months, and he'd really like to talk. Mr. Cox firmly refuses. Only Barry's mother and he are allowed visitors. Barry isn't up to socializing. He'll pass along Ray's good wishes. Ray quickly presses the question. From anything Barry has said, have they found out what actually happened? The phone call the newspapers made such a big thing of. Has Barry said who made it? Is there any connection between that call and what happened after? Mr. Cox says it seems very doubtful. According to Barry, that call was from Helen Rivers. Julie leans her head against the car seat back and sighs with such weariness that Ray glances at her worriedly, asking if she's holding up. She says she's fine, just having a blast, then hears the hysteria in her own voice and is frightened by it. Someone is lying. Helen, Barry, or Mr. Cox. Who and why? They drive back slowly through gathering twilight. Mountains to the east are touched with pink from the last rays of sun. Julie thinks of the Greg's house somewhere up there. Megan now standing in the yellow kitchen, deciding whether to fix a hot dinner for just one person. A couple of miles north, the Silver Springs picnic area is growing cool and shadowy. Maybe later a moon will be caught in that pine tree. She says wearily, it's like a merry-go-round, everything circling with no answers. Why would any of the three lie? Ray suggests maybe they're all telling the truth. Not the real truth, but the truth as they see it. Mr. Cox could be repeating exactly what Barry told him. Barry could have believed the person on the phone was Helen, even if it wasn't. Julie considers, someone imitating Helen's voice? Possible, though Barry knows Helen so well. Ray points out Barry was expecting her call. She'd called earlier and left word for him to phone her, and he hadn't. If the caller was a girl or woman who knew Helen well enough to copy her voice, and if Barry expected it to be Helen, he could have been fooled. Julie asks who would do such a thing. Then a thought strikes her. Elsa. Helen's sister. Why not? She's horrid, obviously as jealous of Helen as possible. Julie remembers the first day she met Elsa. Her mind flies back to that bright spring day just over a year ago, when she walked home from school with Helen to see her prom dress. It had seemed strange at the time. They had little in common. Helen wasn't a girl for confidences or easy friendships, and took little interest in school activities. Julie was almost too involved with clubs and committees and cheerleading to have time for a close relationship with anyone. But that day, Helen had stopped her in the hall, excited about a dress for the prom, her eyes shining, her face holding a delighted child's look of wanting to share a marvelous treasure. Julie had smiled back, skipped the dance committee meeting, and said she'd love to see it. They'd met at the south door and walked together through a soft blue afternoon. So much like this one, Julie recalls with pain, except that one had been unmarred, filled with sunshine, plans for the dance, the wonder of being young and pretty and in love. Helen's house was small and shabby, overrun with children. 2 little boys fought in the front yard. A blaring TV dominated the living room, where a solemn girl of about 12 and a toddler in a wet diaper sat mesmerized. Helen's mother was in her bedroom, not feeling too good. The noise gets to her when she's pregnant. Helen led Julie to her room at the back of the house. That was where she met Elsa. Heavily built, apparently a couple of years older than Helen, sprawled on one of the twin beds leafing through a magazine. She glanced up as they entered, eyes narrowing behind her glasses. She made a sour comment about the princess actually bringing home a girlfriend. Helen introduced her as her sister, then Julie. Elsa flatly identified Julie as the cheerleader. They hear about Julie James all the time around here, her and Barry Cox and the other high-class people Helen runs around with. Julie greeted her as pleasantly as she could. Her eyes fell on the dress spread across Helen's neatly made bed, simple and white with flowing Grecian lines and thin gold thread along the edge. Helen lifted it and held it up, and Julie caught her breath. Gorgeous. Elegant. Where in the world did she find it? Silence. Then Elsa spoke, telling Helen to speak up. She turned to Julie. Thrift shop. That's where Helen gets all her elegant clothes. Things other people don't want. That dress probably belonged to some society lady who got too fat to wear it. Helen's face turned bright red. She lowered the dress, holding it defensively in front of her. She said Elsa didn't have to say that. It doesn't look like it's from a thrift shop. Julie quickly said she thought it was wonderful Helen found it. It doesn't matter where it came from. She was sure it looked better on Helen than on anyone else. If that's the sort of thing at the thrift store, Julie would start shopping there too. Helen admitted she doesn't always shop there, most of the time at regular stores, but formals are so expensive. Elsa sat up on the bed, speaking quietly but with such bitterness Julie winced. She complained about having Monday as her day off. What can you do on a Monday? The rest of the week she's on her feet behind the lingerie counter at Ward's, bringing home money so their mother can turn around and hand Helen enough for a prom dress she'll wear once and stick in the closet. Helen said it didn't cost very much. Elsa demanded why Helen didn't earn the money herself, get an after-school job, put cash in instead of taking it out. That fast food place on Carlisle is looking for kitchen help during supper hour. Helen refused. She doesn't want to cook hamburgers. She does enough of that here. She hung the dress in the closet and suggested she and Julie go get a soda. Julie glanced at her watch and said she had to get home. Ray was coming over. She smiled at Elsa. It wasn't easy, said goodbye, and that it was nice meeting her. Elsa answered likewise. The picture Julie has retained of Elsa: heavy-legged, square-faced, hair matted from the pillow, a slight double chin, sharp eyes glaring through glasses, and that terrible bitterness. She tells Ray that Elsa could have done it, called Barry pretending to be Helen, even shot him. Ray sounds skeptical. Elsa is a mess, he agrees. But what's she got against Barry? You don't shoot your sister's boyfriend for no reason, Julie says, jealousy. By hurting Barry, she'd be hurting Helen. Ray allows it's possible. And the cover-up with the notes to Julie and him? Elsa could have learned about the accident. Helen said they used to share a bedroom. Maybe Helen talks in her sleep. They've reached Julie's house. Ray pulls up in front, leaving the motor running. He asks if she wants him to come over later to talk. Julie says they've talked enough. Her head is churning. Hashing it over further won't help. The person they need to talk with is Barry. Ray says maybe by tomorrow they can. He moves as if to touch her, then thinks better of it and puts his hand back on the wheel. He tells her to take care, not a casual goodbye, his eyes worried. He means it. Be careful. Don't go rushing out to meet someone who phones. They can't be sure it was Elsa. Can't be sure of anything right now. Julie echoes him. You too. Take care too. She gets out. Darkness closes in quickly. The sky has faded from pink to purple. One lone star twinkles directly above. The house lights are on. On the steps she looks back. Ray is still parked there, watching her. Only when she's inside with the door closed does she hear the engine rev and the car pull away. Her mother is baking again. A bread smell fills the house. Her mother calls from the kitchen. Julie stands in the living room, bracing herself, trying to calm her heart. Emotional exhaustion threatens to overwhelm her. The warm comfort of the house, her mother's welcoming voice, the safe, familiar odors and sounds and feel of home, suddenly more than she can bear. Her mother calls again. Julie draws a deep breath, goes through the living room and into the kitchen. Her mother, removing bread from the loaf pan, glances at her casually, then not so casually, her eyes questioning. She asks what's wrong. Julie says nothing, motions toward the bread, asks about all this baking. Her mother says a few extra pounds wouldn't hurt her, and asks where she's been, after 6:30. Ray picked her up after school. They rode around and talked. Her mother smiles, glad Ray is back, just wishes he'd shave off that silly beard. Julie says she sort of likes it. He seems older with it. Her mother noticed that too, but thinks it's more than the beard. That year in California matured him a lot. She's always been fond of Ray, but talking with him yesterday evening before Julie got back from Helen's was like talking to another adult. She laughs, saying she doesn't suppose either of them would consider that much of a compliment. Julie finds it funny. Her mother likes that Ray seems older, but with Bud, who really is a bit older, she doesn't like it at all. Her mother explains, there's older, and then there's older. Bud acts like her grandfather. She'd bet he proposes before he so much as kisses Julie goodnight. Julie says she'll let her know. He hasn't done either one yet. Julie leans against the doorframe, watching her mother transfer the bread onto a plate. Overhead light catches her mother's hair in a glint of silver. Julie is startled. She's turning gray. Frozen, staring at hair always so thick and dark. Like raven wings, her father once said, reaching out to stroke it. When did it begin to change? Wrapped up in her own concerns, she hadn't noticed. The veins stand out like thin purple cords on the backs of her mother's hands as she lifts the cake lid, no longer a young woman's hands. Julie speaks softly, swept by tenderness bordering on pain. She loves her mother so much. Her mother turns in surprise, says she loves her too, asks what's wrong. For one crucial instant Julie wavers, torn by the temptation to throw herself into her mother's arms and weep out the whole dreadful story. What comfort there would be in letting it all out. To lean on an adult's shoulder, to cry that she has done an awful thing, been part of an awful thing, to plead for help, to be told what to do. It seems the closest thing to heaven. But she doesn't. Stopped as much by her mother's vulnerable face as by the memory of the pact. This woman has borne enough burdens. The responsibility is Julie's, not her mother's. Pain shared here would not be pain lessened. She just says she's tired. Exams. The excitement about being accepted at Smith. She asks if her mother wants her to start fixing dinner. Her mother thought they'd microwave something frozen. With home-baked bread, what more do they need? The phone rings. Bud's voice says she must have been talking to someone pretty fascinating. He's been getting a busy signal for over an hour. Julie says there must be something wrong with the line. They have trouble like that sometimes. Bud says he's glad he finally got her. He thought she might want to go to a movie tomorrow night. She's been studying too hard. A little rest and relaxation might be good for her. Julie says only if it's a comedy. Something heavy and dramatic would finish her off. They talk a few minutes. She agrees to a date the following evening. By the time she returns to the kitchen, she has control of herself again. Her mother keeps glancing worriedly during dinner, but their conversation is normal, and that one instant when the whole story almost came rushing out is securely behind her. The nurse in the crisp white uniform sets the vase of carnations on the window ledge and reads the card. from Crystal, saying, "Get well fast, it doesn't seem the same without you." She gestures to the other flowers crowding the sill and bedside table and lining the far wall, asking how many girlfriends Barry has anyway. He answers shortly, "Enough." This is his least favorite nurse. Young, hardly older than he is. Pretty in a crisp, efficient way. The sort of girl he might have made a play for if he'd met her elsewhere. Coming on strong with the football hero routine, knocking her off her feet. That she should have him here at her disposal, flat on his back, helpless, is infuriating. He turns his head, shuts his eyes, pretends to sleep. After a moment he hears the swish of her skirts leaving. It's Wednesday. They told him that this morning. At first he refused to believe it. What happened to Tuesday? Then bits and pieces began coming back. The ride on a gurney down the long corridor, the transfer onto this bed, his father's lined face looking down at him. Later Tuesday comes into sharper focus. His mother weeping, a needle in his arm, a needle in his hip, the white-haired doctor, the black-haired doctor. Surprisingly, he doesn't recall a great deal of pain. "He's sedated," the black-haired doctor said when his father bent over him trying to ask questions. But he wasn't so doped up that he didn't know what the questions were. He told them it was Helen. His father was satisfied, repeated that the call was from Helen to someone behind him. Barry heard his mother's voice exclaiming it would have been, of course. She knew that girl was trouble the first time she saw him. This morning his mind is clearer. He can take things in. The pile of cards on the bedside table, the flowers on the sill, the nurses' identities as they change shifts. He is terribly weak. Reaching for the get well card on top of the pile, his hand shakes so much he cannot open the envelope. But the pain is less than he would have expected, considering a bullet went practically all the way through him. He told the white-haired doctor, who came to change the dressing, that he can't feel his legs at all. The doctor crisply assured him they're there, 2 of them, asking if maybe he was looking for a third. The sweetheart roses are from Helen. "With all my love," the card says, signed Heller, his own private name for her. Exactly the way she signed her junior class picture, the photo lying back at the fraternity house face down on top of his dresser. He wishes there were some way for Helen to know he turned over that picture. Wishes she could know he was through with her before this shooting ever took place. It's one thing to reach the decision that it's time to break up with a girl who's getting to be a drag. It's another thing entirely to find the decision made for you. To discover that the girl you're supposed to be honest, clinging and all-adoring, had in reality been two-timing you. His father told him that morning that Helen had called several times to ask about him. His mother added that Helen and a friend came down to the hospital Monday night. Questionable taste, she thought, getting the news from a TV report. Barry asked if she meant Julie. No, his mother said, a boyfriend, dark-haired, not too tall. Collie something or other. They seemed to know each other very well. She took his hand, saying she knew this wasn't the right time, but she didn't want him leaning emotionally on an unstable relationship. Barry grimly told her there wasn't any relationship. Helen was free to date anyone she wanted. But the revelation knocked the breath out of him. He raged silently. 2 whole years of faithful, loving, "I'm yours forever," and all the time she had some other guy on the side, the lying bitch. And then she had the nerve to bring him to the hospital. If only he had gotten there first. Broken things off standing on his own 2 feet with another girl on his arm while Helen cried and begged. But he had been too worried about hurting her, and now here he was, flat in bed, unable to take even a flimsy poke in return, while his mother brought him the news and enjoyed every minute. He told the stout red-faced nurse to take those roses and shove them, but she didn't. She placed them behind other vases, and he could see them now peeking out from the far side of a shaggy green plant. If he could have gotten out of bed and crossed the room, he would have smashed them to pulp. But he couldn't even do that. He could only lie here and fume and hate everybody. Helen, the boyfriend, the doctors, and the whole damned world, including his mother. She had him down at last, and there was no way of getting away from her ministrations. Not so bad when his father was here too, but this morning, after a brief look in and, "How are you feeling today, son?" His father had gone to the office and left his wife behind. She settled into the chair by Barry's bed with the satisfaction of a mother hen hopping into its nest. After 2 full hours of her chatter, he was ready to shout for a shot, a pill, anything to shut off her voice. She told him they were getting his old room ready, pale green walls, a nice restful color, the portable TV and his computer. His father was going to the university tomorrow to pick up his things. His friend Lou would have them packed, waiting at home for him. Barry tried to conceal the panic. She made it sound like he was coming home forever. he wasn't. As soon as the hole in his stomach healed and he could eat solid food and get his strength back, he'd be up and out. He still had Europe in mind for this summer, though it would have to be the end of it now. His mother said she knew, with a funny note in her voice. Still, while he was at home with them, it would be nice to have a pleasant room to stay in, wouldn't it? She didn't argue about Europe, nor repeat her earlier suggestion about the family car trip to the East Coast. The omission itself was disconcerting and almost frightening. Aside from his parents, Barry was being allowed no visitors, and that was how he wanted it. Having his mother constantly there was strain enough without a troop of frat brothers and weeping females. As the irritating nurse had commented, enough flowers had arrived to open a flower shop. He could imagine the scene. Crystal and Madison and two-faced Helen and the rest drifting in and out, wringing their hands, having to be introduced to each other across his bed. Even Julie had sent a plant with a note saying, "Get well fast, we're thinking about you." Who "we" was he wasn't sure, herself and Helen, or Ray, or somebody else. He couldn't care less. A voice echoes his last thought, familiar but not heard in a long time. "Hey Barry, are you asleep?" Barry jerks his eyes open. Ray is standing there. Ray explains he came up the back stairs, walked down the hall and in the door. Past some nurses but nobody stopped him. Barry says he's not supposed to have visitors. Ray knows, and he'll probably get thrown out in a couple of minutes. Curious despite himself, Barry studies Ray's face, changed tremendously. Broader through shoulders and chest, somehow older. Very tan, and the beard gives character to a face that always before held a not quite finished look, like a portrait where the artist couldn't decide what to do with mouth and chin. Now the face is done, a man's face. The eyes are steady and direct and soften with sympathy. Barry sarcastically says it's going great, he was needing a nice vacation. How are things with him? Ray comes around to the side of the bed, looking down at him. Crazy, Barry thinks. He's never had Ray look down at him before. He's always been the one to look down. He knows the top of Ray's head by heart. Ray says he's sorry as hell, this is a shitty thing to have happen. Asks if Barry's in a lot of pain. Barry says it isn't exactly a picnic, and asks why Ray came. To see how he was, for one thing. All his friends have been calling the hospital, but they don't get much information. Ray talked to Barry's dad yesterday and hated to keep bugging him. Barry asks what his father said, that he was over the hump, getting better, able to see the family. Stuff like that. Barry asks if his father said anything about his legs. A shadow flickers across Ray's green eyes. A slight hesitation. No. Barry calls him a liar. Ray denies it, says he didn't talk very long, that his father said Barry was going to be okay. Barry thinks, I hate him. Lying to me, patronizing me, standing here on his two good legs, able to turn around and walk out whenever he wants. I wish somebody would shoot a bullet into his guts so he'd know what it was like to lie on the ground in the dark and yell and not have anybody hear you. Aloud, he asks how California was. Ray sounds relieved at the change. Good in some ways, not so good in others. He did a lot of thinking out there. Being alone with no one to fall back on. Learning how to fall back on yourself. Settling down in your mind and getting your thinking into balance about right and wrong and responsibility and what's important. Barry interrupts. He knows what Ray is getting at. He wants to blow the whistle about that accident. Right? Ray says he doesn't want to blow any whistle, just thinks they went off the deep end too fast. They were all shaken up that night and made a decision they shouldn't have, and now they ought to consider it again. Barry tells him to consider all he wants, but he can't break the pact. Only if they all agree, and Barry doesn't. Ray draws closer, lowers his voice. It's more than a moral thing, it's for their own safety. Somebody has their number, and whoever it is put a bullet through Barry the other night. He was lucky to live through it. Who's to say whoever it is won't try again when Barry gets out? Barry says when he gets out, he won't be within range of any hothead with a gun. He'll be flat on his back at home in a nice, restful green bedroom with his mother standing guard at the door. Ray tells him to think about the rest of them, think about Helen. Barry would rather not. If Ray sees Helen, he can tell her to stop bothering his folks with phone messages. Girls like her are a dime a dozen, and he happens to have a pocket full of dimes. Barry, listen. No, Barry says savagely. Somebody shot him, yes, but that doesn't mean it had anything to do with the car accident. That's old stuff. It's over. This was something entirely different. Ray asks how he knows. Did he see who did it? No, Barry says, but he knows why. He had $50 in his wallet when he left the house that night. When they brought him in, he didn't have any cash left. Ray exclaims doubtfully. Robbery? Yes, Barry says. What else? But what about the phone call? The papers said he got a call right before he went out. Some of the guys at the frat house heard him talking to somebody, promising to meet her. His father says it was Helen. Helen says it wasn't. Barry admits it wasn't. He told his father that because it was the easiest thing to say, he didn't want to mess things up more than they already were. The girl he was talking to is a real hot little number. He's been seeing her for a long time now, but didn't want to hurt Helen by having her find out. Ray asks, "This girl called and wanted Barry to meet her on the athletic field. Why?" Barry clarifies, he wasn't meeting her there. He was just crossing the field because it was the shortest way to the stadium. He was going to meet her there to watch the fireworks and then go back to her place. He never got there. Tough luck for him. Ray makes him swear it was another girl he was dating. Barry swears it, and Ray can tell Helen if he wants to. Let her face reality for a change. He's got plenty of girls on the hook. Helen's just one of them. Ray asks then this had nothing to do with the Greg kid. That's what Barry is telling him. Two different things. Ray turns him in for the Greg kid. All he's doing is kicking Barry when he's down. He swears if Ray does that he'll never forgive him. They made a pact. Ray says, "Okay, simmer down." He didn't mean to get Barry so riled up. Barry asks what Ray expects, throwing something like that at him. He's riled up, his head throbbing, the whole room starting to move out of focus. He tells Ray to get out. He's not supposed to see people, and he doesn't feel so great. Ray says he's sorry, touches his shoulder, tells him to get better. Barry gives a dismissive, "Yeah, sure," and closes his eyes as the room swings around beyond the darkness of his eyelids. Barry screams silently for Ray to get out, to walk out on his good legs, run around the block, something. Brutus. Judas. Faithful, loyal best friend with his new, balanced thinking and, let's dissolve the pact. Get out and leave him alone. He wishes he could see Helen's face when Ray tells her the phone call was from another girl, somebody he's been seeing for a while now. That would show her. She might as well know she hadn't quite made a fool of him. Maybe she's playing around, but so is he, a whole lot heavier. It could have been true. It could have been another girlfriend on the telephone. Crystal calls sometimes, and others. It could as easily have been one of them that night calling to meet him at the stadium. Or it could have been Helen. That was who he had expected. That was why the strange voice disconcerted him so completely. He had answered, and the voice, low-pitched and muffled, as though talking through cloth, said his name. "A friend," the voice said. "A friend who knows about something and needs to talk. About something that happened last summer." What would Barry say if the caller had a picture? An action picture with a car and a bicycle, just part of the bicycle. Would he be interested in seeing it? Barry said no. Perhaps there might be other people to show it to, the boy's parents. They might be interested. Barry bit before he could stop himself. You can't take good pictures at night. Immediately realizing what he'd done, he filled with fury at his own stupidity. He demanded who the hell the caller was. Somebody who uses special film, the voice told him. Fast film that takes great shots in dim light, even less than headlights. Willing to make a deal, sell the picture plus the negative. Not taken digitally, not scanned. The caller wasn't asking him to buy it sight unseen. Calling from on campus could show him the picture. Barry said there isn't any film like that. He wasn't sure of his ground, never interested in photography, knew little about it. He'd believe it when he saw it. Then meet him at the athletic field in about 5 minutes, under the stands. Fine with Barry. He hung up and turned to the boys behind him. One of them joked that if he talked to his girl like that, she'd shoot him. Funny, Barry thinks now that he put it that way. Like a premonition. Keeping his eyes tightly closed, he thinks about where his feet are lying. They're there, the doctor said, and they are. He's seen the shape of them under the sheet, sticking up like blocks of wood. So much for Ray Bronson. Crashing in here, trying to pump him, making threats. So Ray came to see how he was, did he? Like hell. He came to get information to cover his own ass. So he got it, but it wasn't what he expected. Well, suppose Ray figures things out for himself with all that good thinking he taught himself in California. Barry doesn't owe him anything. Ray can figure things out for himself and Julie and Helen. It'll give them something to keep them busy in the evenings. As for Barry, he's got plenty to do. Chatting up pretty nurses, bedpans, visiting with his mother. Enough to keep him busy the rest of his life. The words blur in his head into one massive shout, and the hot tears finally come. Ray draws a long breath of relief as he passes through the hospital's swinging glass doors into the warm afternoon sunshine. Well, that's that. He'd worked himself up over nothing. The attack on Barry was robbery. Nothing to do with him or Julie or even Helen. Nobody's out to get any of them. at least not physically. The relief is so great he feels lightheaded. Walking down the sidewalk, he has a crazy desire to shout at everyone he passes, "Hello, everything's okay." Though it isn't really. One terror out of the way doesn't mean nothing is wrong. A person exists who knows, or thinks they know, about last summer's accident. Though Barry has now erased the fear that this person is out for physical revenge, there still must be some plan behind the malicious notes and clippings. No actual threat has been made yet, but soon there will have to be something. Perhaps blackmail. Pay me or I go to the police. If that happens, Ray thinks, he can go to the cops. Fine with him. He's not handing over $1 to get further into this mess. If he had his way, he'd be headed straight for the police himself. If only he hadn't let himself be talked into that damned pact. If he'd listened to Julie that night instead of to Barry. But what's done is done. That night can't be relived. Neither can any of them dictate what happens from now on. Elsa, if, as Julie suspects it's Elsa, will do that. But the more he thinks about it, the harder it is to imagine Elsa as a blackmailer. Nothing subtle about her. If she had something to use against Helen, she'd use it with full venom. But the brains and patience for this cat-and-mouse play would be surprisingly out of character. A voice behind him calls his name. He turns and stares without recognition at the dark-haired, square-built young man. Then realization hits. Bud. Bud thought it was Ray but wasn't sure. Saw him come out of the hospital. A friend, Ray says. Barry Cox. Julie may have mentioned him. Bud nods. The guy who was shot over at the college, a tough break. He asks how Barry is doing. Are they allowing visitors? No, Ray says. He sort of crashed through the gates. Barry is doing okay as possible. The sight of Barry's long, strong body laid out flat and helpless has shaken Ray severely. He has little experience with hospitals, only once to see his mother after an appendectomy. That was different. She was smiling. They all knew she'd be home in a couple of days, strong and well and ready to throw herself back into the full joy of living. With Barry, no such guarantee exists. Paralysis, Mr. Cox said yesterday. At the moment that condition does seem to exist, but it may only be temporary. Barry hasn't been told, but he knows, Ray thinks now. The knowledge was there in Barry's eyes, the bitterness in his voice, a thin mask over the sound of fear. Bud says he hates hospitals. He's heading to the Starbucks on the corner for coffee cake or something. Want to join? Ray hesitates. He's had lunch, not particularly hungry, but admits a painful curiosity about the guy who appears to have taken his place in Julie's life. She said she's not in love, but there must be something in the relationship for her to keep seeing him so regularly. Sure, he says. He could use a cup of coffee. The coffee shop is almost deserted. Ray orders a latte. Bud buys a croissant. They select a table. As they wait, Ray studies Bud's face. What does Julie see in it? Does it flash into her mind as soon as she wakes up? Does it have a place in her dreams at night? Bud is not exactly handsome, but has an air of quiet self-confidence. The cut of his hair and his closely shaven face accent the years between their ages. He has the strong jaw and direct, determined gaze of a young man used to setting a course and sticking to it. If he decides he wants a girl, Ray thinks, he wouldn't call it quits until he got her. The observation is disturbing. Bud asks if Ray is sure he doesn't want something besides coffee. Ray says yes, the hospital visit got to him. Barry was his best friend in high school. Not so close now, but still, seeing him down flat like that. Bud can imagine. He hates hospitals. Just the smell gives him nightmares. Ray asks if he's ever been in one. Bud says yes, after Iraq, and doesn't elaborate. He asks what Julie's connection is with Barry. She told him she sent a plant over. She doesn't date Barry, does she? God, no, Ray says. She doesn't even like him much. They all used to hang out together, Julie and him and Barry and a girl named Helen Rivers. Then something happened, and they don't anymore. Bud repeats Helen Rivers' name slowly, says it sounds familiar. Maybe Julie mentioned her. Ray says she could have seen her on TV. She works for a local station. Ray decides to ask the question uppermost in his mind. Is Bud seeing a lot of Julie? Quite a bit, Bud says. Does that bother him? Sure, Ray says wryly, but there doesn't seem much he can do about it. She used to be his girlfriend, and he'd better warn Bud. He's going to do everything he can to get her back. Bud's voice holds a hint of amusement. Ray can try, but it's not that easy to go back and pick up a relationship once you've let it go down the drain. If Julie still means that much, why did he take off on her? Ray says he didn't take off on her. He felt like he had to get away for a while, do some thinking, sort out how he felt about things. Bud says it sounds like escapism. plain running away. It was, Ray admits. He knows that now. That's why he came back. Expecting to find everything blown over and back to normal? No, he didn't expect that. The subject is getting out of hand. Ray shifts uncomfortably. The last person he intended to spill his guts to is his competition for Julie. He says they had something pretty great once, Julie and him. Maybe he can get her to give it another shot. Maybe he can't. It'll be up to her. He guesses she told Bud she's going east to college in a couple of months. Ray sat across from Bud Wilson, the question hanging between them. Was he really planning to follow Julie to college? Ray admitted he couldn't. Hadn't even applied to the Ivy Leagues. Probably wouldn't have made it in anyway. He'd stay local, register at the university. When Bud asked about a major, Ray said he thought education might work. He'd always been good at explaining things. Tutored the whole football team back in high school so they'd stay eligible. His dad wouldn't love it, but the old man had already accepted his son wasn't going pro. Teaching beat pumping gas, at least. Bud started to say something about Ray being a kid lover, then cut himself off. The coffee arrived. Ray went to the counter, dumped sugar in, stirred. An uncomfortable realization crept through him. He'd been talking too much to someone who wasn't a friend, barely an acquaintance. His whole reason for this coffee was to learn about Bud, not offer a biography of himself. He returned to the table and tried to pivot. He asked if Bud's hospital stay had been from a war injury. Bud shut that down fast, didn't want to talk about it. Ray apologized awkwardly. Bud waved it off, said war was hell, some famous survivor had put it that way. Shooting people and being shot at was bad enough, but at least that was the military's arrangement. What really got to a person were the children caught in the middle, not even understanding the fighting. Just stuck there because the violence had landed in their neighborhood. Ray muttered something inadequate. Silence stretched out. He took a sip of coffee and realized he didn't actually want it. He said he had to go. Bud seemed surprised. They just sat down. Ray claimed a phone call, something he should have made earlier, slipped his mind. Bud smiled for the first time and said if the call was to Julie, don't bother. He was taking her out tonight. Then he made a bet. Julie wouldn't go to Smith in September. Ray called him crazy. Of course she was going. She was excited about it. What could possibly hold her back? Bud answered with simple confidence. Himself. She didn't know it yet, but it was a long 3 months until September. Ray stood up, said again that Bud was crazy. Julie wasn't ready to settle down, wasn't even 18 yet. She wouldn't stay in this town for anyone. Bud just raised a hand in farewell. Good talking, see you around. Ray left a tip at the counter and stepped outside. He pulled out his phone and dialed Julie. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. He said it was him and hung up. A wave of unreasonable anger hitting him. Who could she be talking to this early afternoon? She'd just left her school friends, nothing to call them about. Maybe her phone was just off? Then why? He'd assumed she'd be waiting eagerly for his call about Barry. He knew his reaction was irrational. She had no idea he'd tried to see Barry today, no idea he'd be calling. Who she talked to after school was her own business. Whom she dated was her own business too. Except for this guy, he told himself. He didn't want her going out with Bud. Their conversation had shaken him more than expected. Until now, he'd thought of Bud as a rebound. Nerdish, filling time, giving Julie leverage against her mother's nagging about her lack of dates. Now he saw differently. Bud was quiet but intense, with a seriousness a sensitive girl like Julie might find appealing. The age difference no longer seemed in Ray's favor. Bud had the confidence of a man who knew what he wanted, and apparently he wanted Julie. Well, he wasn't going to get her. Not if Ray had anything to do with it. He got into his father's car, started the engine, so lost in thought he didn't notice another car pulling in behind and following him home. Up in her apartment, Helen was heading down to the pool when the phone rang. She told Collie to go ahead. It might be about Barry. She caught it on the 6th ring. Ray's voice came through thin and distant, with good news. He'd seen Barry that afternoon. The motive was robbery. Nothing to do with last summer, just some freak after cash. Helen's mind stuck on the first part. How could Ray have seen Barry? He wasn't a relative. Ray explained he'd snuck up the back stairs between visiting hours. He asked if she'd understood what he'd said about the shooting. Yes, of course, she said, but then pressed. How was Barry? How did he look? Did he mention her? Ray said he hadn't talked long. Barry didn't look great, but who would the day after a bullet was dug out of his back? He was lucid, though. Helen asked if she could sneak in the same way. Ray's voice turned odd. He wouldn't try it. Barry was feeling down, not in the mood for visitors. She'd be wiser to wait. Helen started to object if Barry was glad to see Ray, but Ray cut her off. He wasn't glad. And he wouldn't be glad to see her either. Believe him, he knew what he was talking about. Barry was depressed. Let him be for a while. Helen thanked Ray for calling, asked if he'd told Julie. He hadn't been able to reach her yet, but he was trying. She hung up with a sigh, relief and frustration tangled together. The idea that Barry wouldn't want to see her was ridiculous. Too ridiculous to argue about. If he was depressed, that was exactly when he'd need her most. No point trying to go tonight with his parents there, but first thing in the morning, she would. As for the robbery motive, that settled the question of breaking the pact. She'd never forgive Ray for making that suggestion. The fact he'd even consider going to the police without clearing it with Barry first showed how little honor he had for an agreement. Suppose he'd just gone ahead and done it without talking to Barry. He'd have ruined Barry's life for no reason. She picked up her towel, started for the door, hesitated, then pulled it closed without locking it. She said aloud that terror time was over. The words felt good, and as she said them, she realized she had been frightened. Not enough to break the pact, but good and nervous. Well, that part was over. She walked along the balcony and down the steps to the pool. Collie stood by a deck chair, chatting with the prettier of the two schoolteachers from 213. The girl was doing most of the talking. Collie was polite, but his eyes went straight to Helen as she came down the stairs and stayed on her. He asked if the call was important. She reported that a friend of Barry's had crashed the guard and gotten in to see him, then phoned her. The schoolteacher gave Collie an innocent smile and said Barry was Helen's boyfriend, a total hottie. No wonder Helen didn't have eyes for anyone else. Helen agreed agreeably and said Barry was better, going to be just fine. Collie said good news, then challenged her to a race across the pool. He dove in ahead. Helen watched him swim, long, powerful strokes, like he was working off anger. The schoolteacher came over and said Helen was a glutton, not playing fair. How many guys did she need, one for every day of the week? She nodded toward Collie, who'd already nearly finished the length. Helen had her beloved Barry. Leave something for the rest of them. Helen said Collie was just a friend. The teacher shot back. Did he know that? Helen said of course. He'd driven her to the hospital the night Barry was shot. He knew all about Barry. The girl said she didn't care what he knew. He hadn't looked at anyone but Helen since he arrived. The rest of them couldn't even get a conversation going. He was polite, but he looked right through them. And if Helen must know, the teacher had gotten more reaction from Barry than from this guy. Helen coolly said Barry was nice to everybody, turned her back, and dove in. The cold water jolted her into frenzied motion. Like Collie, she swam fast and hard to burn off fury. She calmed after a moment, floated onto her back, and looked at the girl, who had turned away and was returning to her deck chair. Jealous, Helen thought with distaste. She'd accepted long ago that she'd have no real girlfriends at the Four Seasons. It didn't bother her much. She'd never been one for female friends anyway. Even in high school, the only person she'd really considered a friend was Julie. And even that friendship hadn't been typical. Julie's time had been swallowed by clubs and cheerleading. Their bond came less from shared personalities than from the fact their boyfriends hung out together. Still, it had been Julie she'd taken home to show off her prom dress, and Julie to whom Elsa had blabbed that the dress came from a thrift shop. Julie had been gracious about it. Never mentioned it to anyone as far as Helen knew. That was the kind of disclosure the girls from Four Seasons would leap at like hungry wolves. Helen could already hear it jittering from apartment to apartment. Where did Helen Rivers buy her dresses? Helen let herself smile. She didn't have to worry about that kind of thing anymore. Let the little bitches rake her over the coals, as long as jealousy inspired it. Nobody minded being considered too beautiful, too successful, too lucky. If those were the things they pounced on, let them pounce. No matter what they said, they took vicarious pleasure in the fact that Channel 5's future star lived among them, spilling glamour into their dull lives. Nobody could look at how she dressed now and make thrift shop comments. Moving into the apartment had been the grandest event of her life. Even Elsa had been impressed, suggesting they move in together, offering to chip in for rent and share cooking. The suggestion was so preposterous. Helen was stunned. She finally said no. She was renting a one-bedroom, would keep funny hours, needed to sleep in mornings. Besides, they couldn't both leave home at once. Their mother had come in, put an arm around Elsa's shoulders, assured her Helen would be right there in town and her time would come too. All little birds fly the nest. The glitter of envy in her sister's eyes filled Helen with half-guilty satisfaction. She added that Elsa couldn't afford it anyway. She was taking an apartment at the Four Seasons, and rents there were astronomical. And she did it. She was here, right where she said she'd be. The Four Seasons was the first complex she'd looked at. The moment she saw it, shining like fairyland with the pool, bright flower beds, wooden balconies, the gregarious crowd of moneyed young singles, She knew this was the culmination of her dreams. She'd told herself Barry would love it, and she'd been right. The incredulous expression on his face the first time she showed him into the blue and lavender apartment erased any shadows from Elsa's cruel comments. He'd commented that this was how a future star lived, half teasing, but with renewed interest in his eyes. Helen Rivers might not have social background or much education, but she certainly wasn't a nothing. She paddled leisurely to the end of the pool where Collie waited, sitting on the edge, dripping brown hair plastered over his forehead. He called her the laziest swimmer he'd ever seen. She smiled up at him, knowing how her wet hair framed her face, knowing how she looked in the tiny blue bikini, better than the school teacher across the pool, better by a long shot than any other girl in the building. She was Barry's girlfriend, that was understood. But it didn't hurt to have someone else admire her. She told Collie to watch the news tonight and see if she got her hair dry. He said he wouldn't be watching TV, he'd be busy. When she asked doing what, he said he had a date. She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. He asked if she thought he'd eat his heart out while she mooned over her battered lover. She felt herself flush with embarrassment. Hadn't that been exactly what she thought? She said she just hadn't known he'd met anyone yet. He'd only moved in less than a week ago. He said there were other girls besides the ones at Four Seasons. This one he'd known before he ever met her. She said awkwardly she hadn't realized. Collie answered quietly that she didn't realize a lot of things, didn't know what he did when he wasn't with her, where he came from, what he was interested in, what he thought about, what courses he planned to take, where he'd worked, how he lived, who the people were that he cared about. She hadn't been interested enough to ask. Everything they'd ever talked about since the day they met had been her and her wonderful Barry. She admitted he was right, but said he didn't have to make her sound so self-centered. He said she'd said it, not him. There was no laughter in his face. She realized she'd almost never seen him laugh. His face was dark and solemn, a face that had been places and seen things, some unpleasant. He said she was pretty, but plenty of other people existed. She might try looking at them sometime, some were interesting. He touched her chin. He was interesting. Look at him sometime, ask things, listen to answers. She might find he had things to say she'd like to hear. He might soon have a more important place in her life than she thought. Then he flipped to his feet and announced just loud enough for everyone to hear that he was off to dress for his date with a cute little redhead. Couldn't be late picking her up. Helen didn't believe it. She gripped the pool's edge, stunned and bewildered, as if a pet puppy had suddenly bitten her wrist. He was Collie, her friend Collie. How could he say things like that? Then she heard laughter. The school teacher had been joined by her roommate, and they were enjoying Collie's farewell tremendously. Her astonishment turned to rising anger. He did that on purpose, trying to embarrass her. That bastard! His words came back. You said it. I didn't. She clenched her teeth, fighting the urge to climb out and race upstairs to intercept him. But she couldn't. It would look like she was chasing him. She'd have to swim longer, then sit around chatting as if Collie Wilson meant nothing. Which of course he didn't. Meanwhile, who was this girl he'd known before he met her? And just how well did he know her? Mrs. James put the last dinner dishes into the dishwasher and poured a final cup of coffee to carry into the living room. The windows stood open to the breeze. Spring poured in with the faint sweetness of first hyacinths and the thin chirp of an early cricket. It was beautiful, a heavenly night. Things had gone well at school. Julie had been accepted at Smith. By rights, she should be floating on air. So why did she feel so strange? An odd, prickly feeling along the back of her neck. Something was going to happen. She didn't know what or how she knew, but something bad was in the air, and there was nothing she could do to prevent it. It wasn't the first time. Premonitions had come to her throughout her adult life. The first had been when Julie was 8. Mid-morning, sunlight pouring golden into the yard, birds chattering in the elm. She'd been kneeling in the grass pruning roses when she stiffened with the realization something was wrong. She chided herself, went inside to check the stove and calendar, and while she was there the phone rang. The school, saying Julie had fallen on the playground and broken her arm. The next time came a year later, so strong and sharp it was, almost physical pain. She'd cried out, not surprised later to see a police car pull up. She'd gone to the door and waited as 2 officers came across the lawn. One said he had bad news, an accident. Her husband's car. She'd answered dully that she knew, gone for her purse, and didn't see the astonishment in their eyes. In the years since her husband's death, the feelings had never occurred so strongly again. They'd been there off and on, though, almost always predicting trouble. There was the time the light switch shorted and the kitchen caught fire. She'd been at a PTA meeting, called Julie visiting a friend's house, and said to run home and check. She had one of her feelings. Julie reached home in time to call the fire department, and the damage was minor. Not that the feelings were foolproof or gospel. Last summer, for instance, she could have sworn something terrible approached during a period when Julie was seeing a lot of Ray. For a while, Mrs. James wondered if that was it, if the young people's feelings for each other were growing too strong and would create a problem. Fond as she was of Ray, she was aware of his immaturity. She wanted another year of high school for Julie, then hopefully college. The idea of unwed pregnancy or very young marriage wasn't easy to accept. In this case, the problem hadn't materialized. There had been one long evening she'd lain awake, counting minutes, waiting for Julie to return from a cookout in the mountains. That night she'd known something would happen. Then she'd felt silly when Julie came home safely before midnight. Soon after, she and Ray had stopped seeing each other, and Ray had gone off to the West Coast. Since then, Mrs. James had carried a strange, troubled feeling about Julie, nothing she could pinpoint. Her daughter seemed different, quieter, more studious. Her social life had fallen away, but that might simply be because Ray was gone. She told herself Julie was just growing up, changing from a light-hearted girl into a serious-minded young woman. She wasn't sure she completely favored the change. The old, happy-go-lucky Julie had been fun to live with, but no mother really liked to see her child grow up. This month, though, there was something else. A growing restlessness, a nervousness she couldn't put her finger on. Something wasn't right. More and more often on days she substituted and had to stay late making notes, she called home to check Julie was safely back from school, and if not, called her cell. She'd all but stopped her own evening activities, meetings, plays, card games with friends. She felt she should be at home in case. In case of what, she didn't know. But tonight she did know. Tonight there was a reason. All day she couldn't rid her mind of the image of Julie from the night before, standing in the kitchen, looking at her with pleading in her eyes. Pleading for what? What did she want or need? Julie had said she loved her so much. How many years had it been since she'd burst out with something like that? It was almost as though she were begging for something, asking for help. "Mom, I need you," in the voice if not the words. Something was wrong. If she knew what it was, she could fight it, but she couldn't even begin to imagine. Julie had gone to her room to dress for her date with Bud. The sound of her CD player flowed down the stairs, music trickling into the living room, mingling with spring's scents and sounds. It was a beautiful night, and with growing apprehension, Mrs. James realized it was a night when something terrible was going to happen to somebody. Mr. Rivers tilted his chair back against the kitchen wall and asked if there were more potatoes. His wife said of course. If there was anything they always had, it was potatoes. She wiped her hand across her forehead and opened the oven, telling Elsa not to dig in. Dad needed to eat, and she didn't need extra helpings. Elsa snapped back, asking if her mother wanted her to look like Helen. She might as well forget it. She wasn't about to starve herself like Helen did, hoping some TV station would offer a contract. Mr. Rivers said Helen had willpower. It had gotten her where she wanted to go. Elsa added that Helen hadn't cared who she walked over to get there. Mrs. Rivers turned from the oven. A thin, sallow-faced woman who'd been mildly pretty briefly in her teens, now looking permanently exhausted, the violet eyes she'd given Helen oddly out of place in her drawn face. She told Elsa she didn't like hearing her talk that way. It sounded like she begrudged her sister a happy life. Elsa burst out that she didn't see where Helen deserved one. It wasn't fair she had it all. Looks, a cushy job, all kinds of money. What had Helen ever done to earn that? She'd never had a thought for anyone but herself. Her father reminded her Helen helped out here, sent a check every payday. Elsa said not as much as she could, not so much she couldn't buy anything she wanted. Helen was selfish, and Dad knew it but would never admit it. Helen had always been his favorite. Mrs. Rivers said Dad didn't have favorites any more than she did. They loved all their children alike, and were glad for anything good that happened to any of them. Elsa's luck would turn. She'd meet some nice boy. Elsa asked bitterly, like Barry Cox? Her mother said maybe. Who knew who she'd meet? Elsa said bitterly it would never be anybody handsome and rich like that. It would be a nothing, and she'd marry him because nobody else asked, and they'd live in a house like this one with 1,000,000 kids just like her mother did, on mashed potatoes. Her father told her shortly to go look in on the kids. Sounded like they were tearing the living room apart. Elsa said she was glad Helen's boyfriend got hurt. Maybe this would show her she couldn't have everything perfect. She left the table. Her voice floated back, telling the kids to get those trucks off the sofa. Her mother shook her head, asking what they did wrong. Mr. Rivers said they didn't do anything wrong. They did the best they could. There'd be a life for Elsa if she got out and looked for it and stopped using her sister as an excuse not to. Mrs. Rivers said softly that Helen was selfish and did seem to have everything. Her husband disagreed, not nearly. When Helen found someone to love her, then maybe she'd have everything. But the way she was going, that would take a long time. First, she'd have to learn to think past herself to somebody else. Mrs. Rivers objected that Helen was so pretty. There wasn't a man in the world who wouldn't want her. Just look at the Cox boy. Mr. Rivers said gently he didn't say want, he said love. And about her looks, he put his hands on his wife's stooped shoulders and told her Helen might be pretty compared to some girls, but she'd never hold a candle to her mother. Mrs. Cox asked nervously if her husband thought Barry knew he wasn't going to walk again. Mr. Cox asked why she'd say something like that. The doctor said that wasn't definite. There was still hope. She said the doctor had said if a week passed without some sign of movement in his legs. He interrupted, saying a week hadn't passed. This was only the end of the second day. They had just stepped from the elevator into the hospital corridor. Evening visiting hours had begun. Mr. Cox regarded his wife with despair, saying he almost thought she was wishing this fate on Barry. She was so glad to get him anchored under her thumb, she didn't even mind that he might be restricted to a wheelchair. Mrs. Cox was sincerely shocked, calling that a dreadful thing to say. Of course she minded. This was horrible. Still, she didn't begrudge a minute of the time she'd spend taking care of him. He was her son, her baby. She'd do everything to make life pleasant when he came home. Mr. Cox said quietly that she'd done her best to run that boy's life since the day he was born. She couldn't stand the thought that any part of it might not include her. No wonder he started rebelling his last year of high school, picked up a girl she didn't approve of, started smoking pot and driving like a madman. A boy needed breathing room to grow into a man. Mrs. Cox said angrily he'd had all the breathing room he could want. They were sending him to college, living at a fraternity house. Mr. Cox countered that he was at the university because she didn't want him moving out of town, and the fraternity house was something she gave in on to keep him from taking an apartment elsewhere. She started to say he was accusing her of not loving Barry. He said he wasn't accusing her of that. He reached out and took both her hands, saying it wasn't all her fault either. If he'd been home more, not so wrapped up in his work, she wouldn't have had to center her life on Barry. What he was saying was they had to face the situation and do something. When Barry left the hospital, he'd have to come home with them. Yes, but not to stay. If the worst came true, if their son never walked again, he was not going to spend the rest of his life with them. She gasped, asking how he could suggest they throw their crippled child out on the street. He said that wasn't his meaning. Just because a man couldn't walk didn't mean he was destined to be a helpless invalid. Barry could continue college, graduate, go into some line of work from a desk, drive with hand controls, support himself, live where he liked, travel without them. They were going to give him a chance to grow up. He released her hands and started down the hall. She hurried after him, exclaiming about that Rivers girl. What would they do about her? In Barry's weakened state, somebody would have to protect him from opportunists. What if he decided? As they drew opposite Barry's room, the white-haired doctor came through the doorway and pushed it closed behind him. He had happy news. His lined face looked younger than it had that morning. Their son had just moved his left foot. Mr. Cox stopped so suddenly his wife bumped into him. Then that meant they were on the road up. The doctor said warmly it would take time, extensive therapy, and he couldn't guarantee Barry would be back on the football field anytime soon. But if he could move his foot, he'd be able to move his legs. And if he could do that, he'd walk. Mr. Cox let out a long breath of relief and asked his wife if she heard that. She said softly yes, oh yes, reaching for the doorknob, saying she couldn't wait to see him. The doctor told her she'd have to wait. Barry had asked for some time without visitors. Mrs. Cox objected that they weren't visitors. They were his parents. The doctor explained that Barry had asked for the telephone and was making a call. It was odd how emotional jolts affected people. The first thing Barry said when he realized the significance of what was happening, seeing his foot move under the sheet, was that he'd done a terrible thing. Mrs. Cox repeated the phrase in disbelief. Barry had never done wrong to anyone in his life. What could he be thinking of? The doctor said Barry told him he'd lied to somebody. It was all pretty confused. He'd been under sedation and was still groggy, but he said he'd lied to somebody and had to straighten it out before it was too late. Mr. Cox frowned, saying he didn't understand. Barry hadn't seen anyone but them since the accident. Whom could he have lied to, and about what? He asked the doctor to let him talk to his son. The doctor refused firmly. Barry was making a phone call and had been very definite about wanting privacy. The telephone rang in Helen's apartment. 12 times, then stopped. The man in the low-seated lavender chair sat quietly until it finished. He flexed his strong hands and laid them flat on his knees. A smear of yellow paint marked the back of one hand. He had come in easily, the balcony door hadn't been locked. Now there was nothing to do but wait. Helen heard the phone ringing as she climbed the steps and hurried along the terrace. She'd stayed at the pool much longer than intended. Collie's abrupt departure had been noticed by everyone within earshot. Swallowing her anger, she'd swum back and forth, then climbed out to join the growing crowd of young people enjoying after-work relaxation around the pool. She'd accepted a beer, something she seldom indulged in, from the lawyer in apartment 107, laughing and chatting with such vivacity that she was soon surrounded by male admirers. Even after the school teachers gave up and went to dinner, Helen stayed, sipping and talking, watching evening settle. When the gaslights came on, she glanced at the lawyer's watch and said she had to get changed and get to the studio. The lawyer joked she'd be a hit as is. She laughed, tossed her empty beer can into his lap, circled the pool, and mounted the stairs. She heard the muffled phone on the second balcony and quickened her steps. The apartment door was unlocked. But the moment her hand touched the receiver, the phone stopped ringing. She said aloud it was making a habit of that lately. Maybe whoever it was would call back? Or maybe it was Elsa and she was lucky to have missed her. A voice asked if she usually left her apartment open. The unexpected voice hit like a cold hand on her neck. Helen whirled in panic, then gasped with relief as she saw the man in the purple armchair. Collie. She said he scared her to death. What was he doing here? He said he was waiting for her. He'd changed out of his trunks into a polo shirt and trousers. His wet hair was slicked down. He said she took her time coming up. He thought maybe something had happened to her. She defied him, saying she was having a good time down there. Then asked if he'd decided not to keep his date. He said there was plenty of time. His date wasn't till 8, but he thought he'd better explain what he was going to do on his date and who with. She told him he didn't have to. She had no strings attached. He was free to date anyone. He stood up, pulled his chair around to block the doorway, and told her to sit on the sofa. About his date, she interrupted, saying it didn't matter. He told her not to interrupt. The thing was, he was going to do something interesting to his date tonight. He was going to kill her. She stammered that she couldn't have heard correctly, but the words had been so clear. She stared blankly, saying he was making a joke and she didn't think it was funny. He said it wasn't funny at all. Killing people never was, whether with a gun, grenade, bomb, or bare hands. If you ran somebody down with a car, a little kid on a bike going home to his mother, that wasn't funny either. Not for the kid, not for his family. She asked how he knew, who told him about that. The question caught on her tongue. He said nobody told him. He'd had to do a lot of searching to find it out. They hadn't told him when Danny was killed. They couldn't reach him with the news. He was in Iraq, waiting to be flown back to a hospital. By the time he got the message, the funeral was over. He never got home for it. She whispered, asking who he was. Who the hell he was. He said she knew that. Collingsworth Wilson. His mother was married to a man named Michael Gregg. Danny Gregg was his half-brother. She repeated shakily. Your half-brother. Oh my God. He didn't seem to hear. His eyes were dark with remembering. All he could learn when he finally got home was what his folks told him. A hit and run. The person who called the police had sounded like a teenager and said, "We hit him," so more than one person was in the car. A lot of people came to the funeral. His stepdad showed him all the sympathy cards and letters, including a whole raft of yellow roses delivered without a card from People's Flower Shop. He went to People's and talked to the saleswoman. She remembered the roses. They'd stuck in her mind because it was so odd to see a young girl spend so much money on flowers and then not put a name on the card. The girl had red hair and wore a silver cheerleading megaphone on a chain around her neck. Helen murmured Julie's name, knowing she should be running, screaming, but too numb for movement. It took him a while to find her. First he went to different high schools during basketball games, but there weren't any red-headed cheerleaders. Then he started asking about last year's cheerleaders. He talked with some guys in the bleachers at halftime, and one mentioned a cute redhead who'd dropped off the squad, just wasn't interested anymore, had gone intellectual, dropped out of everything, wasn't even dating. Helen said he couldn't have known, couldn't have been sure. He admitted he wasn't at first, but it gave him an idea. He decided to send a note through the mail, something that would shake her up if she was the right person but wouldn't mean anything if she wasn't. She reacted, all right. That very afternoon she came over like a shot, and so did her friend Barry. That's how he learned about Helen, and he followed Barry when he left that night, watched him walk into the frat house, learned where he lived. Helen asked if that was when he moved into Four Seasons. Her shock was fading. She was coming alive again, her eyes shifting to judge the distance from the sofa to the door. Collie's chair blocked the path. The window was closed. If she could reach it and yank it open and scream, he said she'd never make it. He was closer, and she'd never have time to pull it open. Didn't she want to hear the rest? She said no, with mounting terror. He said she was going to, so she'd better relax and listen. Yes, he moved into 4 Seasons, met her, and she filled him in on Barry. She'd said she went with him all last year, so Collie knew he'd been the one with her that night. He gave Barry a test too. Phoned him with a story about having pictures of the accident. Barry said he'd meet him out on the athletic field to look at them. Helen asked in horror if he shot Barry. Him? He said right. She asked why. She could understand how he felt about his brother and wanting to see them punished, but couldn't he have just gone to the police? Collie asked how he would have proved it. Helen argued that he wouldn't have needed proof. Just being accused would have been enough. They would have confessed. He countered, asking what she thought would have happened then. A fine, maybe. Whoever was driving would have lost their license. Maybe the driver would have spent a little time in jail, sentence reduced by half for good behavior. The law was easy on minors. Whatever happened, it wouldn't have been enough. He told her to look at it through somebody else's eyes, through his eyes. Helen thought in terror that she didn't want to see anything through his eyes, didn't even want to look at them. Something was wrong with them. They were getting darker and darker as he talked. How could she ever have thought he had nice eyes? Collie continued in his low, matter-of-fact voice, somehow more dreadful than if he'd shown emotion. He told her he'd cracked up in Iraq. Not just him, but plenty of other guys. Something about seeing people blown to pieces got to you. So he came home from Iraq, and what did he find? His kid brother dead. His mother in a loony bin in Los Lunas. His stepdad down there with her. His sister Meg living alone in the mountain house, worrying herself sick. Their whole family was wrecked. And what about the 4 responsible? One had a plush TV job. One was a college football hero. One was off lolling on California beaches. One had just been accepted to Smith. All their lives were going along just great. Helen spoke the words that he'd decided to kill them, but couldn't bring herself to believe them. This was Collie, the guy 2 apartments over with a slight crush on her. The kind person who picked her up at the studio the night Barry was shot, drove her to the hospital, waited with her until there was news. Why did he do that? Why was he so good to her? He answered the unspoken question. He took her to St. Joseph's because it was the only way to learn what had happened to the bastard. It was dark on the field, and Barry jumped when the flashlight went on. Collie wasn't sure where he hit him. He'd meant to do the job right, but the way it turned out might be even better. For a guy like Barry, life in a wheelchair could be worse than no life at all. Helen's cell phone, plugged into a charger on a side table, rang sharply. The sudden sound jabbed through the tension like a needle, making Collie jerk upright and shift his eyes away from Helen's face for an instant. In that instant, she moved. The cord of terror holding her in place broke. She bolted across the room, not toward the door or window, but in the opposite direction, through the bedroom, into the bathroom. She slammed the door and punched the lock just seconds before Collie's weight struck it from the other side. The knob rattled angrily. Helen frantically looked for something to arm herself with. Flimsy, feminine objects mocked her. A makeup kit, a plastic hairbrush, a rack of fluffy bath towels, a small bottle of bubble bath. The bathroom window was small and high, plated over with permanent translucent glass. The rattling stopped abruptly. The only sound was the continued ring of the phone in the front room. Then that stopped too. She nervously called out Collie's name. Only heavy silence answered. Less than 2 hours ago, Ray had told her the attack on Barry was simple robbery. How could Barry have lied to them that way, lulling them into a false sense of security? Or was it Ray who'd been lying? Julie had said it couldn't have been Ray. She knew him better than either of them, and he just wouldn't do that. Helen had agreed then. Now, trembling behind the ominous silence of the locked door, she had to admit the same thing silently to herself. Ray wouldn't have tricked her. Ray wouldn't have lied. He'd been repeating exactly what Barry told him. She said softly that it was Barry who hadn't told the truth. 100 pictures of Barry flashed through her mind, his loving words and cocky grin, flaring temper and heavenly kisses. Barry who was going to marry her, or was he? Who adored her, or did he? Who'd never looked at another girl, or had he? Ever since that day he'd pulled up behind her in that little red sports car and asked if she wanted a ride. He'd lied to Ray about the shooting. Why, she didn't know, nor did it matter. Whether from anger over some imagined affront, bitterness over his own injury, perversity, or fear that Ray might break the pact and go to the police with the story of the accident, Barry had lied. And with this lie he'd shown how little their safety meant to him. Ray's, Julie's, and Helen's. She whispered that he'd loved her, but even to her own ears the words were weak and meaningless. That was a lie too. She spoke aloud, asking if Collie was out there. Only silence. What was he doing? Standing there waiting? Or back in the purple chair, hoping she'd assume he'd gone away and opened the door? Could he possibly think she was that much of a fool? If he wanted her, why didn't he force the door? He was strong enough. But that would make noise, the kind that carries. The whole apartment would shake. People would come running. Screams would get her nowhere. The Four Seasons were virtually soundproof. Stereos could blare, parties churn until all hours without disturbing neighbors. But the sound of a door being beaten in, surely that would be heard. From the other side came a click. A faint scrape of metal against metal. The noise came again. Faint. Purposeful. Helen's eyes flew upward to the top of the door. Her breath stopped. The metal plate was moving. He was taking off the hinges. She couldn't just stand here and wait. She had to do something. She yanked open the medicine cabinet, grabbed a heavy glass perfume bottle, stepped onto the closed toilet lid, then onto the tank. She lifted the bottle high and brought it down against the window pane with all her strength. Again and again she struck, smashing away jagged glass. No time to feel pain or consider consequences. She thrust her head and shoulders through the narrow opening and screamed for help. Voices floated up from the pool area. Laughter. A guitar twang. The lawn below lay empty. The gaslight glow was broken by pockets of darkness. She screamed again. Then, because it was the only thing left to do, she wriggled forward through the window frame and let herself fall. Mrs. James wished her daughter would reconsider and stay home. She knew it sounded silly, but she had this feeling. Julie laughed it off, her mother and her feelings, but couldn't completely hide the uneasiness that stirred within her. There was something oddly disturbing about her mother's premonitions. Many times they meant nothing, but other times, it was hard to forget the phone call that had seemed ridiculous, but sent her home to find a smoke-filled kitchen. Julie said she was just going out for a couple of hours, a movie with Bud. Her mother wished she'd call it off. Julie said she couldn't reach him. He'd just moved into an apartment, the phone wasn't installed yet, and she didn't have his cell number. Mrs. James persisted. Didn't he live at Four Seasons? She could call there and leave a message at the office, or phone Helen Rivers to run over and tell him. Julie said it was probably too late. He'd have left by now. To humor her mother, she went to the telephone, lifted the receiver, listened, and set it down. She couldn't call anyway. Trouble with the line again, no dial tone. And she'd left her cell in Ray's car. The framed mirror over the telephone table gave her face back to her, pinched and odd under her red hair. She pushed the hair back from her forehead. She should have washed it, should have put on blush. Her face looked so pale. What was she doing going out looking like this? What would Bud think of her? Not that it mattered. Bud was just Bud. He could think what he chose. If he didn't ask her out again, that was all right too. Looking back at last year, the hours spent getting ready for Ray, hair always clean and wavy, makeup perfect, heart filled with excited anticipation. It was like looking at another girl in another world. Sometimes she wondered how she'd ever started dating Bud in the first place. If their meeting hadn't been so simple, she probably wouldn't have. He'd just come over to her at the library, gestured to the book she was selecting, and said she'd like that one. Let him show her another by the same writer that was even better. They'd left together, and it seemed natural he'd fall into step beside her since they were headed the same direction. After that, date had followed date because it was easier to say yes than no. It was a distraction, got her through long evenings. She'd even tried to convince herself she might come to care for Bud if she just kept seeing him long enough. That was before Ray came back. Fight it though she would, one instant, one glimpse of his quizzical green eyes, his thin face now bearded but warm and familiar, the merest touch of a hand, and she was back exactly where she'd been at the beginning, looking at this boy other girls hardly noticed and telling herself he was the one. And it wasn't fair, not to Bud, not to any of them. She shouldn't be leading him on with false hopes when she felt like this about someone else. The doorbell rang. Julie said that was Bud now. She turned toward the door, caught a glimpse of her mother's face, and stopped. She said softly that she wouldn't go. Julie started to say she knew she was being silly, but her mother cut her off. It was okay. Julie admitted she didn't really want to go anyway, that she'd just been stubborn. She went to the door and opened it, greeting Bud. He returned the greeting, looked past her into the living room, and said hello to Mrs. James. Julie's mother invited him in for cake and fresh coffee. Julie apologized and said she'd decided she'd rather not see a movie tonight if he didn't mind too much. Her mom was uptight and not feeling great, and she'd like to stay home. Would it be okay if they just watched TV or something? Bud said it was a good film. He thought they'd agreed on it. Julie asked if they could see it another night. It would keep playing all week. Bud said she'd promised to go tonight. His voice was flat and demanding. Julie thought in surprise that she'd never seen him act impatient before. His face was set with intensity, his eyes very dark. Some trick of light and shadow made him look almost like a stranger. She realized suddenly that she was glad her mom had made her promise not to go. She didn't want to go. She didn't think she wanted to see this guy anymore at all. She suggested that if he was so hung up on seeing the movie tonight, he should go ahead without her. Bud asked if she was trying to dump him because her old boyfriend was back in town. The situation became clear to her. Ray didn't have anything to do with this, honestly. She just wanted to stay home. He was welcome to hang out there or go to the show on his own. Bud stood silent a moment, his eyes flicking from her face to her mother and back. He said finally that he recognized a brush-off when he was getting one, and asked how about walking him out to the car. Julie hesitated, wanting to consult her mother with a glance, but that would have been actively rude. She told herself this was just Bud Wilson, just good old Collingsworth Wilson, and she'd been out with him over a dozen times. What was she getting so jittery about tonight? Bud said he needed to tell her something important. Just walk out with him, okay? He added that he'd had lunch with Ray Bronson today. She was startled. He said they'd done some talking, among other things. He asked again if she was walking him out. She said all right. He held the door open. She stepped onto the front porch. They went down the steps together. Night air lapped around them, soft and sweet. The sky curved like a dark bowl studded with stars. He said it was a pretty night and reached for her hand. A shudder ran through her. She asked herself in bewilderment what was wrong. Bud had held her hand before. It didn't mean anything. She'd never minded it. Why was she reacting like this now? She thought some of her mother's funny feelings must be rubbing off on her. But she didn't want to hurt him by drawing away, so she let her hand lie in his as they walked across the yard to his car. Bud told her to get in for a minute. Let's sit and talk. She said they could talk out here. He insisted what he wanted to say needed to be said with her sitting down. Just get in the car, it would take a minute. Julie burst out that whatever he was going to tell her, she didn't think she should hear it. He was right about what he'd said earlier regarding Ray. Whatever Ray had told him today was true. She and Ray used to matter to each other very much, and that feeling hadn't gone away. She'd hoped it would, but it hadn't. She didn't think they ought to see each other anymore. Bud said, ignoring her statement, that it was funny. She'd never called him Collie. She repeated the name, confused. She couldn't see his face in the darkness, but she was very aware of his hand tightening on hers. She said she didn't know he wanted her to call him that. When they first met, he'd told her everybody in his family called him Bud. He spoke quietly. His kid brother started it. Danny was a cute little kid, couldn't say Collingsworth, called him Bubba for brother. When Danny got older, he changed it to Bud. He called their sister Sissy. Julie said uncomfortably that was cute. What was he talking about? He was acting so odd. Was he sick? On drugs? Drinking? She said she had to go in now. Her mom wasn't feeling well, honest. Bud said his mother wasn't either. She was in a lot worse condition. He had an account to settle with the four of them, but it hadn't all worked out as he'd planned. She was the most important one, though. The one who'd made a joke of it by sending the flowers. Julie whispered. Flowers? You mean, oh no, you're not. He released her hand. For a frozen instant she stood rooted, gathering herself to scream. Then his strong hands were around her throat. The scream started and ended in one short moan. He said, Roses. Yellow roses. Tons of them. Pa described them to me. All those roses that looked like sunshine. If you'd wanted to give him sunshine, why didn't you go back to him? Why didn't you sit in the road with him and hold his hand and wait? Did you really think you could buy us off with roses? What good are roses to a little boy dying alone in the dark? The hands squeezed. Nothing existed now except those hands, the pain, the roaring in her ears, a million lights flashing behind her eyes. He was going to kill her. It was impossible, the thing the hands were going to do. She wasn't ready to die, hadn't even lived yet. So much still ahead. College, work, a husband, children, her own home. What would this do to her mother? First Dad, then her. She couldn't lose everybody. She'd never see Ray again. There was a time she'd looked into those tilted green eyes and said she loved him. So long ago. He'd never know she still did. Then she was thinking no longer. Heavy blackness all around her. She knew at last what it was like to be alone in the night. A voice came from a long way off, muffled and almost lost in the pounding of blood through her head. Julie, come out of it. Come back to us. She thought it was a dream. Did you dream when you were dead? Was Danny Gregg dreaming? Her father? The voice said she was coming out of it. It was familiar. Not a dream voice. She opened her eyes. The stars were so low they seemed to rest against her face. The porch light's dim yellow rays illuminated the boy bending over her. He asked if she could speak to them. She whispered Ray's name. The effort sent agony through her throat. Bud was going to... Ray said he knew. She didn't have to worry. Bud wasn't going to be doing anything for a while. Ray had clobbered him with a flashlight from behind. Not the way the good guys did it on television, but there wasn't time to think about that. Her mother was there too, kneeling beside her, saying that boy must be crazy to attack her for no reason. Julie told her he had a reason, and it was a good one. She asked Ray how he knew to come, how he could have guessed. Ray said he hadn't guessed. Barry called him a few minutes ago, said he was releasing them all from the pact, that they were in danger, all three of them, and to get hold of her and Helen. Ray tried calling Helen but got no answer, and when he called Julie, the line was out of order. Then something flashed through his mind. She asked what? Bud's hands. Ray had sat with him while he ate lunch, and Bud had paint on the back of one hand. It didn't register then, but after talking to Barry it hit him. Yellow paint, the same shade as the trim around the Greg's roof. Remember, Ray had wondered how somebody as short as Megan could have reached it? Julie whispered about the shirts on the line. Ray said those were Bud's, of course. Megan was his sister. Mrs. James asked in bewilderment what this was all about. She didn't understand. Did Ray come here tonight knowing Bud was going to try to harm Julie? She broke off as headlights cut the darkness. A car with a flashing red signal pulled up to the curb. Two uniformed figures hurried up the driveway. The first patrolman said there'd been a 911 call. The caller said they might be having some trouble. A girl had fallen from a second-floor window at Four Seasons Apartments. She was knocked unconscious, but when she came to, she told the people who found her that a man named Wilson had tried to attack her. She thought he'd be headed over here. From the looks of things, his eyes took in the three of them, then shifted to the inert form lying a short distance away. She was right. Ray said she was. There had been trouble, and it didn't just happen tonight. They wanted to tell about it, from the very beginning. He slid his arm under Julie's head and lifted her gently to sit up. Leaning against him, she looked across at her mother's worried face. They could never erase what they'd done last summer. It was done. They couldn't undo it, ever. But they could face it. That would be something. Aloud, she asked Ray why Bud had never tried to do anything to him. He'd been involved as much as the rest. Ray said softly that Bud had, tonight. His arm tightened around her. Bud had known the worst punishment for Ray would be to stay alive in a world that didn't have her in it. The end. Thank you for staying with this story from beginning to end. Your patience and curiosity are what keep these narratives alive. Lois Duncan was inspired to write I Know What You Did Last Summer after a real hit-and-run accident near her home in Florida. The driver was never found, and Duncan began wondering, what if someone knew? And what if that someone decided to make sure the guilty never forgot? Written in the early 1970s, the story emerged during an era when America was questioning trust. Trust in neighbors, in institutions, even in the silence that protects wrongdoing. Philosophically, the novel asks, does an accident make you a criminal, or does the choice to hide it? Duncan completed the manuscript smoothly, but later admitted the real challenge was convincing publishers that a young adult thriller could tackle guilt and moral ambiguity without easy answers. She refused to soften the ending, and that decision became the book's strength. The novel explores guilt, denial, and the terrifying weight of shared secrets. Its storytelling is lean and tense, built on the idea that the past never truly stays buried. The same author later explored psychological suspense in Down a Dark Hall and Stranger with My Face, cementing her reputation as a master of young adult terror. The 1997 film adaptation introduced the story to a completely new generation. But it also took significant liberties. The film kept the core premise, four friends, a hit-and-run, a year-later threat. However, the movie removed most of the novel's character depth, added a slasher film villain, and changed the ending entirely. The book is quieter, more psychological. The film is louder and more visceral. Neither is wrong, but they are very different. The production faced location difficulties, shooting much of the film in coastal California rather than the novel's North Carolina setting. Budget constraints also meant the original script's more complex flashback structure was simplified for linear storytelling. Jennifer Love Hewitt and Sarah Michelle Gellar brought genuine vulnerability to their roles, turning teenage guilt into something heartbreakingly real. Their performances anchored a film that otherwise leaned heavily into horror tropes. Director Jim Gillespie approached the story as a thriller first, not a mystery. His goal was to make the audience feel hunted, not just curious. That decision shaped the film's breathless pacing. Gillespie later directed the underrated horror film Venom and worked extensively in television, But I Know What You Did Last Summer remains his most widely recognized feature. During filming of the iconic chase sequences, Hewitt and Geller performed many of their own stunts. One night shoot on a rainy dock ran so long that both actresses reportedly fell asleep between takes. Here's a lesser-known detail. The book's original title was going to be The Killer Inside, but Duncan's editor pushed for something more conversational. Also, the film's famous line, "What are you waiting for, huh?" was partially improvised on set. If you've only seen the film, the original novel still holds layers that only the written word can fully reveal. Duncan's prose captures something the screen never could, the slow, suffocating unraveling of a conscience. If this retelling meant something to you, subscribing helps support more stories told with the same care. And I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts, whether appreciation, criticism, or your own interpretation of where guilt really begins. If you know someone who loves thrillers that stay with you long after the final page, consider sharing this story with them. Some stories frighten us, others remind us that silence has a cost. This one does both. Until the next tale finds you, take care of what you carry.